Tara was an honor student, finishing among the top 5 in her class. She met her future husband, Stephen, while attending the University of Michigan. Before long, they were married and blessed with 2 wonderful children. They settled into a lovely home in a Michigan suburb and even hired a nanny to help care for their kids. Life seemed perfect, or was it? Tara was reported missing on Valentine's Day, 2007, but she wasn't just missing. It was much more sinister than that. This is her story. I'd like to introduce you to Tara Linda DeStramp. She was born on June 28, 1972, in the lakeshore community of Escanaba, Michigan, to Gerald Dusty and Mary DeStramp. Around the time that Tara was 2 years old, her parents purchased a home in Rock, Michigan, on Beaver Lane. This is a rural community, and while growing up, Tara had a very close relationship with her sister, Alicia. They were raised on a farm and loved horseback riding. In their spare time, they would be busy tending to their sheep, cows, chickens, and pigs. The DeStramp family showed off some of their animals at state fairs, where Tara won the coveted Grand Champion Market Hog Trophy at the Upper Peninsula State Fair. She was only 18 years old. Aside from her expertise in raising animals, Tara once won the state BB gun championship with her all-girls team. She was bright, energetic, and had a beautiful smile. Tara was also a very social and talkative little girl. She would get in trouble during class for being quite the social butterfly. Occasionally, Tara's teacher actually bribed her with gum to keep her from talking. And that's a new one. That's one way to do it. As a child, Tara was in 4-H, the largest youth development program in the nation. It was founded in 1902 and connects public school education to rural life. This is where children living on farms in rural communities get hands-on learning. It's estimated that on average, 1 in 7 Americans were members of 4-H when they were children. Some of the group's most notable alumni include former President Jimmy Carter and a well-known name in true crime, Nancy Grace. In high school, Tara played clarinet in the school band and was a varsity cheerleader. She also played basketball and participated in track. Tara graduated in the top 5 of her class. After high school, Tara attended community college before deciding to transfer to the University of Michigan. She knew this campus quite well from all the activities she did in 4-H, and she considered it her dream school. The University of Michigan is considered a public Ivy. A public Ivy is a public university that offers an academic experience comparable to that of an Ivy League university. It was during Tara's time at the University of Michigan that she met her future husband. He had attended the university but dropped out. Tara and Stephen met while he was working as an aide to Jack Faxon, who was a state senator at the time. Before meeting Tara, Stephen had dated his childhood friend, Dina Hardy, for a very long time. They were absolutely inseparable, and everyone thought they were going to get married. However, things didn't work out for them, and they split up in 1993. Although Tara was impressed by Stephen's political connections, she initially felt zero intimacy with him. Their relationship was just platonic. While taking classes at the University of Michigan, Tara received some terrible news. Her grandmother had passed away. She had to fly home to Escanaba, Michigan, for the funeral. An unexpected visitor arrived at the funeral home right before the service began to show his support for Tara. A familiar face, Stephen Grant. Tara had obviously made quite an impression on him, as he drove 5 hours to be by her side. At the time, she was seeing someone else, but Stephen was determined to get her to give him a chance. After Stephen arrived at the Crawford funeral home, Tara and her boyfriend's relationship began to crumble. Her boyfriend was actually there, but Stephen started introducing himself as her boyfriend as well. This really confused Tara's sister, Alicia, and the rest of Tara's family because they were pretty uncomfortable. They didn't even know this guy who was already calling himself her boyfriend. Alicia was protective of her sister, and it seemed like Stephen was intent on forcing his way into Tara's life, regardless of her wishes. However, Tara had a different view of Stephen after he came all that way to see her. She thought it was really endearing and began to see him in a different light, perhaps because she was in a vulnerable situation due to the circumstances. Her family respected the way she felt and even offered Stephen a place to stay at their house. but he declined and drove back to Lansing after the service was done. Apparently, his kind gesture worked its magic on Tara. When she got back in town, they reconnected, and soon, she and Stephen were in love. She moved in with him a few months later. When Tara and Stephen first started dating, everyone thought it was meant to be. He was tall, handsome, loud, and funny. They paired perfectly because Tara had a sassy attitude and loved his sense of humor, but they were also opposites in many ways. Tara graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in business administration, while Stephen abandoned his studies altogether, despite only being 20 credits away from completing his bachelor's degree. Stephen Christopher Grant was born in January 1970 to his father, Al, and his mother, Susan. He grew up in Sterling Heights, a suburb of Detroit, with his sister, Kelly. Ultimately, Stephen's parents ended up getting a divorce in 1985. Stephen had a sense of humor, but he was also known for his exaggerations. He would tell the most outrageous stories. One of Stephen's former classmates mentioned that Stephen would talk about things like catching a huge fish, exaggerating and embellishing these stories. Eventually, people would find out that the fish he caught was only 5 inches long. Another thing about Stephen was that he was pretty self-centered. There was a time when he asked a young woman from a different high school to go to homecoming with him, and the whole night was spent talking about himself, telling her all kinds of stories and just bragging about how wonderful he was. However, what he didn't realize at the time was that his date's father was a counselor at his high school. He was sitting there claiming to be a basketball star, but when Stephen's date arrived home, she, of course, told her dad that she was dating this athlete from school. Her father was shocked when he found out it was Stephen Grant, who wasn't even a basketball player at all. This gives you a feel for how Stephen operated. Tara, however, remained completely smitten with Stephen. She, like many others, understood that Stephen just liked to tell tall tales, and she accepted that about him. She thought it was funny, and their relationship began to blossom despite Stephen and Tara's professional struggles. Unfortunately for Stephen, Senator Faxon had retired after Stephen joined his team, leaving him without a job. However, luckily for Stephen, his dad had a job for him. Stephen began working at his dad's tool and die shop, where they would construct precision tools or metal forms called dies, used to cut, shape, and form metal and other materials. On the other hand, Tara worked for a global staffing service in Troy, Michigan. She eventually got another assignment with a construction company responsible for the Hoover Dam and the Transatlantic Pipeline. The Washington Group International Company acquired the construction company in the mid-1990s, becoming Tara's new employer. She loved her career, loved moving up in her career, and also loved to do something else in her spare time, go to museums. She loved art so much so that, while they were sitting on a bench outside the Detroit Institute of Arts in September of 1995, Stephen proposed to her. During the early days of their relationship, Tara and Stephen would visit this museum, which left a profound impression on her. On September 28, 1996, Stephen and Tara were married in a small church in her hometown. As husband and wife, they moved to Shelby Township, a growing neighborhood north of Detroit. Tara and Stephen had their daughter, Lindsay, 4 years after getting married. Baby Lindsay resembled her mom so much. She had big spiral curls and her trademark smile. Tara had the ability to balance work and motherhood, and she did an outstanding job. It helped a lot that Stephen was not employed full-time. He had the flexibility of working for his father, allowing him to care for Lindsay at home, while Tara put in the demanding hours at work to get ahead. Almost 2 years after giving birth to Lindsay, Tara found out she was pregnant with a little boy, their son Ian. She was excited about the birth of her son and how well she was doing in her career. Following the birth of their children, Tara and Stephen could afford to move from Shelby Township to an affluent area of Michigan called Washington Township. Their house was located at 6686 Westridge. It was a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-story home with a big front lawn and a large front porch, perfect for a growing family. Around this time, Tara's job at the Washington Group required her to travel even more frequently after being promoted to operations manager. Tara was traveling weekly to Boise, Idaho, London, Puerto Rico, and many other places. The company Tara worked for, Washington Group International, was based in Idaho, but they provided engineering, construction, and management services to businesses and governments around the world. The potential for career growth was unlimited. They had employees working in over 40 states and more than 30 countries. Tara had her sights set on becoming an executive, so she put in as much time as she possibly could. Lindsay and Ian missed their mom dearly while she was away, and she missed them too. Tara would go out of her way to make sure they knew they were cared for and loved. She would leave notes around the house for her children to find, send them cards, and talk to them almost every night. She was working hard for her family, even though Stephen was only working here and there for his father. Tara's schedule made it very difficult for him to handle everything. The household chores, taking care of the children, all by himself. He was doing what he could, and by all accounts, it looked like Stephen was the ideal version of Mr. Mom. From the outside, the Grant family seemed to have it all. Their life was perfect, but within the walls of their home, all was not well. Stephen's role as a stay-at-home dad really made him feel emasculated. There's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home dad, especially if that is what a couple decides is right for them. It can be very rewarding. But for Stephen, it became a problem. He didn't like being unemployed, and he didn't like changing diapers. It was a serious blow to his ego, especially seeing how successful his wife was. It ended up annoying Stephen. Tara was earning a high salary, and he resented it. Stephen only earned $18,000 in 2006 working part-time for his dad. Tara, on the other hand, made a six-figure salary, and her Christmas bonus alone was $28,000. Tara wanted to make things easier on Stephen. It wasn't her intention to make him feel the way that he did. She was fine with Lindsay and Ian being cared for in a daycare center, so she suggested that they look into it. But Stephen insisted, "No, we need something more. We need a nanny. Not just a nanny, but an au pair." "I had au pairs growing up as well," he added. The word au pair means on par in French, I believe, and it means equal to. It meant that the caretaker would become like a family member, caring for your child as if it were their own. Yes, in French, its original meaning differentiated the child care workers from other household employees, like a chef or a butler. Nowadays, many au pairs in the United States actually come from all different countries, and they speak English very well. The United States immigration officials work with au pairs through agencies, and upon arrival in America, au pairs are classified as visitors, not workers. While caring for children in the United States, au pairs have free time to go to school, spend time with their friends, and socialize. Typically, they do this with other au pairs from the same agencies. In most cases, agencies that sponsor these women have counselors nearby, because a lot of times, they get homesick. So the agencies will have social events and all kinds of other activities to make them feel at home. This is a great option for young women and men who are interested in living or visiting America and making a living while doing so. Stephen and Tara eventually decided on a live-in au pair, and Stephen was in charge of choosing them. After all, he would be the one needing to work with them one-on-one. But the thing is, Stephen wasn't choosing them based on their experience or their expertise. No, he was always selecting the most attractive candidates. Tara was not an argumentative type of person. After all, it was her job keeping her away and leaving Stephen with all the work and responsibilities. But as nice as Tara was, it was always Stephen's way or the highway. Whenever friends got together with the couple, Stephen had everything planned out, including where they would go, what they would do, and what they would eat. But many people said the way Stephen did it wasn't about catering to his loving wife, it was about control. Tara never fought Stephen over any of these plans that he made for them, but to their friends, Stephen appeared to be more demanding. This was evident when Stephen demanded to hire the sexiest au pairs on the websites that he was looking at, instead of finding a job and putting the kids in daycare. It was almost like he wanted a pseudo-wife around. When Tara was traveling for work, she would leave a list of things for Stephen to do while she was away. She wanted the children to go to all kinds of events, and during Tara's absence, she wanted Lindsay and Ian to be enriched and surrounded by supportive people to make their lives easier. For example, she once complained that there was a lack of Spanish classes in elementary schools in their district, even though her children did attend private schools. So they hired a foreign language tutor for Lindsay and Ian. One of the au pairs that Stephen hired did speak Spanish, and she helped their children develop their Spanish-speaking skills. One time, Tara attended a seminar from Landmark Forum, which was a San Francisco company. Through training and development, the company promotes professional and personal growth. As part of the homework for the seminar, Tara, who was always trying to better herself, was writing letters to her parents and her sister. But it was the letter to Stephen that was the most emotional. Tara began this letter by apologizing to Stephen. She told him she was sorry for domineering him and making him feel invalidated. That was never her intent. In her letter, Tara stated that she wanted to renew their wedding vows. She wrote that she wanted to open up her heart to love for Stephen, for the incredible person that he was before the tragic events that I'm about to tell you. It's unclear if anyone had read this letter. Stephen tried. He tried to improve his life. He tried to be productive. He registered 2 different business names in hopes of becoming an entrepreneur, but neither one resulted in success. At the moment, he was a soccer coach and Mr. Mom. And everyone knew Stephen was irritated by Tara's absence from the home because he complained to everyone and anyone, complete strangers, anyone who would listen to him. Stephen had a favorite restaurant that he would frequent on a regular basis, B-Dubs, Buffalo Wild Wings. He became a familiar face at this local establishment, but not for very positive reasons. Now it's true he was very generous with his tips. After all, he was spending his wife's hard-earned cash. Sometimes he would even pick up the bill for veterans and members of the armed forces. But on the other hand, he would occasionally show an arrogant and mean side. He would boast about his $2,500 mountain bike and his affluent lifestyle, making it look like he was either born into money or a successful businessman. Once he got a little alcohol in him, Stephen would go on rants. One of these rants was all about how he couldn't stand his wife's family and how he hated attending family gatherings with them. Okay, sometimes it's true. Not everyone gets along with the family that they marry into. It's not uncommon to hear rants like this. But still, Stephen had another side to him. A stranger side, which creeped out the Buffalo Wild Wings staff. The servers who worked at the restaurant at the time described how Stephen would tell them that he was a covert operative for Tara's employer, Washington Group. Stephen would kind of hint and insinuate that he was traveling the world doing dangerous work as an undercover agent. According to him, Washington Group even assigned him bodyguards to protect him, as if they were right in the room and nobody knew it. What this was doing was implying how important Stephen was to the organization. We know he likes to tell tall tales, but that's like borderline pathological lying, right? When Tara and Stephen finally decided to hire the au pair, Stephen told the Buffalo Wild Wings server that one of the girls had gotten involved with another man while she was working for his family, so they had to kick her to the curb. They had to send her back to where she came from. He also claimed that all the au pairs were falling head over heels for him. They were so in love with him. Stephen told one of the servers that he was in his backyard one night when he saw a light turn on in an upstairs window. When he looked up, his au pair was allegedly undressing and performing for him. He told them that the same au pair also wore skimpy outfits, just to seduce him. I'm sure that's what it was. However, when Stephen's creepy side wasn't drooling over these poor women who were alone thousands of miles away from their loved ones, his mean side would be screaming at them. Stephen once told a story about how he was screaming and yelling at one of the au pairs because the dishwasher broke and she couldn't finish washing his plates. The bartender listening to the story was actually shocked by the way he talked to her. So Stephen only kept these au pairs for a short time before firing them and then hiring another. He and Tara went through 7 au pairs in 5 years. Besides the servers at Buffalo Wild Wings, many other people had to put up with Stephen's bizarre behavior. Eric, Tara's brother-in-law who was married to her sister Alicia, was not a fan of Stephen Grant. Eric thought of him as the type of relative that everyone just tolerated because he was married to Tara. But his controlling behavior made family gatherings unbearable for Eric. He said that Tara would ask him and Alicia to take vacations with her family, but he couldn't. The main reason was because of Stephen. Tara's friend Amy also had a problem with Stephen. She did not think that they were a match. Amy described Tara as strong-willed and Stephen as moody. She would say that he was always giving out orders. When Tara's friends tried to get to know Stephen for Tara's sake, he would boast about how wealthy his background was and how wealthy his family was. There was just this air of pretentiousness about him, and it made them uncomfortable. In addition to being mean, arrogant, and controlling, Stephen was also a womanizer. When he was at Buffalo Wild Wings one night, he talked about how he would try to pick up girls at Michigan State games. He would even tell women that his wife was actually dead. One of the servers was stunned and asked Stephen how he could do something like that. According to him, he was already going to hell, so who cares? He had been observed at this establishment saying things like, "I'm an atheist, I don't believe in anything," and that he didn't care about morals because he didn't believe in God and was going to go to hell anyway. So what did it matter? One time, Stephen told his server that he didn't like Tara coming with him to the MSU games because when she did, she didn't have any fun. This is his wife he's talking about. Other times, he said that he would hook up with women at a motel after the game. He would take them home from the game and hook up with them in motels. He also would call his ex-girlfriend, Dina Hardy, every year just to see how she was doing and whether or not she was still married. However, the staff at Buffalo Wild Wings said Stephen stopped talking about his casual affairs when someone new came into his life, a woman named Verena. Verena was placed in his home by the Au Pair in America agency in August 2006, and after that, Stephen's behavior changed. He only talked about how beautiful and incredible Verena was. Verena Durkis was only 19 years old. She came from the Rhine Valley in Germany, an area known for its vineyards. Working as an au pair for the Grants was her first time in the United States. It had only been a year since she graduated from high school. Taking advantage of every opportunity in Michigan, Verena enrolled in Macomb Community College, taking classes related to teaching while learning all she could about Lindsay and Ian to care for them exactly the way the Grants expected her to. Tara was an outstanding mother. She wanted the very best for her children, and that's one reason she was very dedicated to her career. She wanted to give them the best of everything. With her responsibilities to the Washington group and her children, Tara had little time to spend with Stephen. She tried her best to satisfy Stephen's needs, but it seemed that she fell short, especially when it came to stroking his ego. It seemed like the more successful she got, the more stroking his ego needed. Tara had recently gotten another promotion. She was now running an international contractor's office in San Juan, Puerto Rico. She worked there Monday through Friday. She would only come home on the weekends, Sunday nights or Monday mornings. She would fly out to Puerto Rico, and then by Friday afternoon, she would fly back to Michigan. It was a lot, but she was living her dream. She was a high-powered executive, and she deserved it. When Tara wasn't traveling, she spent all of her time off on the weekends with her children. Rather than feeling proud of his independent and determined wife, Stephen felt left out and jealous. Stephen felt like Tara didn't care about him anymore because of her constant absence from home. Even though Stephen was the one overtly behaving badly, he told people that he believed Tara was the one having an affair with her boss, Lou. He wanted to track Tara's online activity, so Stephen installed a keystroke logging device on her computer to get her passwords. Once he did, Stephen started searching through Tara's emails. That's when he discovered messages between her and Lou, which he told people made him feel suspicious about her. Eventually, Stephen became obsessed with the idea that Tara was cheating on him. Whenever Lou texted Tara on the weekends when she was home, Stephen would go off. He would accuse Tara of wanting to be with Lou. She would of course tell him that he was being ridiculous and that it was a professional relationship. That's all. In the fall of 2006, when Verena moved into the home with the Grant family, Stephen found emails Tara was sending to a former boyfriend. Although there was no proof in these emails that Tara was cheating on Stephen, he was still suspicious. He also started emailing the boyfriend, pretending he was Tara, trying to get him to reveal that there was an affair going on. But that never happened. Eventually, Stephen confronted Tara about the email exchange with this ex-boyfriend and somehow even got a hold of this man's phone number. He called Tara's ex-boyfriend and threatened to shoot him. How can he sit there and be angry with Tara over exchanging emails with an ex-boyfriend when, after nearly a decade, he's checking in on his own ex-girlfriend, Dina Hardy? Stephen was even sending her sexual messages in 2007. Before Stephen sent Dina these flirty messages, he was confiding in her that he thought Tara was having an affair with her boss. He would constantly refer to the boss as the old geezer. Toward the end of January 2007, Stephen sent Dina a series of really sexually explicit messages. They were even talking on the phone. One time they talked 10 times in a row that day. During one of these phone calls, Stephen and Dina agreed to meet on January 30th or 31st for dinner. One message that Stephen wrote actually compared marriage vows to speed limits. He said, "Sometimes you break these limits, sometimes you get caught." He would use the word itchy to explain his need for sex, like an itch that needed to be scratched. Stephen would also brag to Dina that he installed spyware on Tara's computer to read all of her emails. Among Stephen's sexually charged messages, he told Dina, who was a nurse, that he needed a sponge bath. That's gross. Do women actually find him attractive acting that way while he's married with kids? The email read that he was alone and had no one to play with him. He sounds like a child himself. Go be productive, that's what I kept wanting to say. While I was doing the research, I was screaming at him, "Go do something." They say idle hands are the devil's playground. Then Stephen sent Dina a message that said, "I'd like to see you naked. Naked women are always good to see, especially if you haven't seen one in a while." It's not like he has to go that long. Sure, maybe he had to wait a week every time his wife went away, but Tara was even planning a vacation for the family, a much-needed break for both her and Stephen. She thought that they could escape the cold weather in Michigan and spend a few days in Arizona. Tara planned this trip for about mid-February, but it seemed like Stephen couldn't wait that long. As soon as the 19-year-old Verena moved in with Stephen and Tara to take care of their children, his messages to Dina Hardy began to dwindle. It looked like he had his sights set on a new play toy. Even though the au pair was much younger than Stephen, he was 37 at the time. He was smitten. For months, he would flirt with her. And one evening, while Tara was out of town and the children were asleep, Stephen was sitting on the couch with Verena. Suddenly, he offered to massage the teenager's feet, acting like it was an innocent act of kindness for everything she had done that day, all of her hard work. It did start to weaken Verena's defenses. Stephen continued to behave inappropriately with Verena. He would lurk in her bedroom doorway, tell her dirty jokes, and he was a smooth talker who was charming to this young and impressionable girl. As time went by, Verena started to feel like she was falling in love with Stephen. When the children were asleep, Stephen would confide in Verena about his suspicions that Tara was cheating on him. Again, this was a tactic to break down Verena's walls, hoping to get her to feel more comfortable with him. Stephen would tell her the same thing he told Dina when they asked him why he didn't just get a divorce. He said, "I don't want to upset the lives of my children." So Verena, trying to be helpful, suggested that Stephen talk to Tara about his feelings, but Stephen said he'd rather just see the guy she's cheating on get beaten up. That's how childish he was. On one occasion, February 1st, Stephen actually told Verena that Tara just needed a swift kick in the ass. That's what she needed. I don't know why. Later that night, he told her he wanted to sleep with her. Poor Verena didn't know how to respond. She tried to laugh it off. Every time he made advances, she would change the subject. However, she finally allowed Stephen to hang out with her in her bedroom. That night, he was in there for 4 hours, continuing to comment on how beautiful she was and how much he loved her legs the whole time. I don't know. His wife is working so hard, she's earned everything that she has, and he's taking advantage of her kindness and her trust. Wait until you hear this whole story. It will definitely stick with you. A few days later, Stephen called Verena into his bedroom one morning. When she opened the door, she got quite the surprise. There was her boss, Stephen, standing there with his pants down at his ankles, his butt-ass naked. And get this, he looked at her and said, "Well, now that you've seen all my goods, now that you've seen what I look like naked, now we can have sex." Again, this poor girl tried to laugh off the entire situation. But then the next night, February 8th, the night before Tara was expected to come back home, Stephen was professing his love to Verena in the middle of the night. This man went into her room, picked her up, and put her inside his bedroom. He began to go down on her, and then they fell asleep in the bed that he and his wife shared together. The following day, Stephen followed Verena around the house like a little puppy dog, continuing to ask her how she felt about him. "Do you like me? Do you love me? What do you want to do now?" Verena wanted to get out of there. That's what she wanted to do. Later that night, she decided to go to the club with her friends to escape Stephen's annoying questions. By February 9th, Verena wanted to get out of the Grant family because Tara was due home that night from Puerto Rico. After what happened the night before, Verena felt bad about sneaking around behind Tara's back while she was out at this bar with her friends. Stephen kept calling and texting her. At one point, Verena snuck away from her group, went into a private corner of the bar, and called Stephen back. She told him to leave her alone. Her friends were starting to get suspicious, but Stephen didn't stop. He texted her right after that phone call around 10:30 and told her that Tara was due home any minute and that Verena owed him a kiss. He texted, "Make a noise when you get home so I can kiss you." No, that is so inappropriate, but remember, he has no morals. Verena did arrive back home about an hour later, and she saw Tara's car in the garage. She was trying to quietly make her way up to her room without disturbing the family when she heard Stephen stomping down the stairs loudly as she was walking into the house. He was screaming, "What are you doing here?" That's when Stephen saw that it was Verena walking in the house, and he broke down in tears. He broke down and said, "I'm sorry, I thought you were Tara." Verena was just standing there, kind of confused, wondering why he would be talking to his wife like that. That's when Stephen told her what happened. He said that Tara had come home, and they started talking about how much she had been gone lately. She finally told him something he didn't like. She said, "I hate to break it to you, but I need to leave a day earlier than planned." This just meant that she had to leave a day early and would have less time to spend there, probably only one full day. We already know Stephen doesn't like that she's gone, so it angered him. He said it turned into an argument about the fact that he wasn't happy. Tara had started unpacking one of her bags and packing another one right there. That's when she got on the phone and said something like, "I'm going to be out there in a minute," and she walked out on him. She left him and the kids just like that. He said he was furious that she left in a dark-colored sedan, which he assumed was a car taking her back to the airport or maybe to a hotel. This was around 11:15. He told Verena that he was probably going to get divorce papers soon, and he said, "I don't blame you if you want to leave, but I need someone here. I need you desperately." Verena was feeling bad for him. You know, he's got this wife that's never home, he's doing his best for his kids, and he was a very attentive father. She was feeling like, wow, I can't believe this has happened to him. His wife just walks out, so she decided to stay. Stephen then asked her, "Can you delete all the text messages? I feel terrible about what we were texting. I don't want to give Tara more fuel for the divorce." When she wasn't deleting the messages fast enough, he actually grabbed her phone and started to delete them himself. When Stephen told Verena that Tara had left him and his children, she showed him sympathy and gave him a lot of attention. She continued to care for his children. The couple would spend all day together, and then Verena would comfort Stephen in his bed at night. However, after not hearing from his wife for a few days, Stephen began to worry about Tara. She usually checked in on the kids, even if they were arguing. She would call. Then Tara's office reached out to her on Monday, the 12th, asking if she was there. Stephen said no. Her boss, Lou, said that she had not shown up for a meeting that morning, which was very uncharacteristic of Tara. But Stephen thought he had to wait 24 hours before going to the police, which is a big misconception. You do not. You can and should go right away. When he contacted some of Tara's friends and relatives, they said that they hadn't heard from Tara either. At first, they told him she probably just needed time to cool off, give her some space. But as time passed, especially when she didn't show up for work, they did get worried. The 34-year-old mother of two had been missing for 5 days when Stephen finally notified the Macomb County Sheriff's Office about her disappearance. He went in on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2007. Deputy Hughes from the Macomb County Sheriff's Office took Stephen's initial missing persons report for Tara. This police station serviced the affluent neighborhood that the Grants lived in, and they were used to getting pretty petty calls from their neighbors. Maybe someone saying, you know, someone's watering my grass, or somebody stole my lawnmower. They weren't exactly used to getting anything more serious than that. And if someone was reported missing, it was usually a teenager who stayed out a little too late and their parents got worried. But they always ended up showing up hours later at the police station. Deputy Hughes spoke with Stephen for over an hour. He told the deputy that Tara left in a hurry after an argument 5 days ago. While Stephen was explaining what happened on February 9th, Deputy Hughes stopped him. He noticed a scratch on Stephen's nose and asked him if the fight with Tara had gotten physical. Stephen said no, it was just an argument. After this interview, a second Macomb County deputy came in and said he was going to take some pictures of Stephen's nose, his body, a bruise on his right leg, and a scratch on his right hand. Stephen said he was injured by metal shavings at his father's shop, and the cut on his hand was from a snowblower. When the deputy asked him how he got the bruise on his leg, he said he didn't know, but he worked with machinery, so that was probably what happened. Tara's missing persons case was passed on to an investigative team and handled by Sergeant Pam McLean and Detective Brian Kozlowski. When Detective Kozlowski questioned Stephen, he asked why Stephen had waited 5 days to report her missing. Stephen explained that in the past, Tara would walk out on him and be gone a few days, but she always returned home after an argument. Stephen said he thought Tara would be back after her work week as usual. On the night that Stephen last saw Tara, she had called what Stephen thought was a car service to come pick her up. He told the investigators that he heard her say something like, "I'll meet you at the end of the driveway," as she walked out the door. He watched her get into a dark-colored sedan, which then took off, and he hadn't seen her since. The detectives paid Stephen a visit at home. He invited them inside and ushered them to the kitchen, where his children were eating dinner with Verena. Everything seemed normal. The house was tidy, and the children were well taken care of. Verena introduced herself as the au pair and said she had been working for them for about 5 months. One of the detectives was questioning her while the other talked to Stephen. They all came together in the living room where Stephen showed the detectives the family computer. They looked at a bank account to see if any money had been taken out or any transactions were made for airline tickets, but nothing unusual was noted. Now for this next request, it's per protocol. They asked Stephen to take a polygraph, and he was offended by that. He asked, "Do you think I did something to my wife?" They said no, because if they did, he would be arrested by now. But this whole conversation triggered Stephen, and he started to break down and cry. The investigators didn't know what to think. What happened? Who was in the black car? Did Tara willingly leave, or was foul play involved? Their goal was just to find Tara and fast. On February 15th, just a day after Stephen reported Tara missing, he agreed to come in to take the polygraph. But that morning, the police received a phone call from David Green, Stephen's attorney, who was worried about his client's rights. No one knew what happened to Tara, and his attorney said he didn't want anyone jumping to conclusions, so he advised his client against taking the polygraph. However, later that day, Stephen was pulled over while driving on a suspended license and was arrested because he had an outstanding traffic warrant. Stephen's attorney, however, did not think this was a coincidence at all. He bailed Stephen out. The media was all over this case at the time, Stephen's attorney told the Detroit Free Press that what the Macomb County Sheriff's Office did was called a pretext arrest. In a pretext arrest, an officer arrests the person for one charge, but the arrest is really for a different one. The real reason they pulled him over was to detain him in connection with his wife's disappearance, especially because he advised his client against taking the polygraph, which isn't even admissible in court. The Macomb County Sheriff's Department denied doing any such thing. They responded to the attorney's allegations and said Stephen's arrest was legitimate. Still, after that happened, Stephen refused to cooperate with them any longer. He continued to tell the media that he was worried about his wife and that he was just trying to find her, and that arresting him wasn't making this process easier. Detectives actually had not been jumping to conclusions. It's true some of them did think Stephen could have had something to do with this, but others weren't so sure. They kept investigating and found out that Tara's last credit card transaction from her business account was at a toll in the parking garage of the Detroit Metro Airport on her way back in town. Next, they went to search for phone records which indicated she called her home first as she was headed away from the airport. The next thing they found were voice messages from Stephen to Tara coming in later that night after he said she left the house. Let's listen because I have a couple of them. Voice 4338.
Sarah, next time I call you, pick up your phone. It's absolute bullshit. You can call me or your kids. I know you're mad. I'm mad. You traveling this much is not right.
So there it is. He's asking her to call back, even if it's just for the kids. There's another one pleading for her to come back, wanting to know why she's doing this. Why did she leave like that? The messages just get more and more angry as time goes on. The next one was him yelling and saying, "I can't believe you're doing this to your children." It really did sound like Stephen was a concerned father who was fed up with his busy wife caring more about her career than him and her family. Maybe she did leave on her own accord. Sergeant McLean and Detective Kozlowski called Au Pair in America, the company Verena worked for, and they informed them that Tara Grant was missing. The agency immediately sent Verena to return to Germany, so she had no choice but to plan to leave the United States and Stephen Grant. She would officially be on a plane back to Germany February 21st. Meanwhile, in the days following Tara's disappearance, the media was all over this case of a missing, successful, beautiful wife and mother. A 3-page article detailing Tara's disappearance appeared in the Detroit Free Press on February 20th. Even Nancy Grace was talking about the story, as well as Dateline and America's Most Wanted. Investigators questioned Verena before she returned to Germany, and during her interview with police, Verena said she enjoyed working for Stephen and Tara, but did not disclose any information about the inappropriate relationship she was having with Stephen. To gain more insight into Stephen and Tara's life, Sergeant McLean and Detective Kozlowski contacted former au pairs who had worked for the Grant family. Many of the au pairs reported that they found Stephen to be creepy. They said that he was constantly hovering over them, snooping through their belongings, yelling at them about petty stuff, and scaring them. According to one former au pair from Ukraine, Stephen was way too interested in her personal life. For example, he wanted to know about her dating life. Who are you going out with? Where are you going? Who are your friends? It was not long after the agency placed her there that she began to feel like someone was watching her, especially when she thought she was alone in the house. This was interesting information. Yes, it sounded like Stephen wasn't the best husband, and he was creepy, but it didn't mean he had anything to do with Tara disappearing. She even hired a private investigator to look into his wife's disappearance. Since he was no longer cooperating with the sheriff's department, he hired a former FBI agent to find his wife. The Macomb investigators monitored Verena's phone calls and her emails after she returned to Germany, and they discovered evidence of this affair with Stephen. Although Stephen wasn't helping with law enforcement, he definitely didn't mind speaking with the media about his missing wife. When Stephen spoke to reporters, he was sobbing. He was pleading for Tara to come home.
Call anybody, call the police, call me, call in-laws, call someone.
He insisted that the investigators were treating him poorly, that they were considering him to be a suspect, even though he denied having anything to do with his wife being missing. Every time he did these media appearances, the investigators would actually respond to the claims. They would say, "We do not consider him a suspect." And one sheriff working on the investigation said, "We haven't even proven a crime was committed." And that's true, Tara was missing. That's all they knew. But after Tara's disappearance, Alicia, Tara's sister, talked to investigators and told them that Stephen had left her a voicemail on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. The message just seemed casual. Stephen didn't even say anything about Tara being missing. He just said to call him back. When Alicia finally called him back later that night, that's when he told her that Tara had left following their argument and she hadn't come back. So at that moment, Alicia and her husband drove from Ohio to Michigan right away. As soon as Alicia and Eric arrived in Washington Township, they began making flyers and handing out missing persons flyers to spread awareness about her sister's disappearance. Tara's sister told investigators that the couple searched everywhere, handing out flyers even at the airport, and Stephen wasn't even helping them. But we know that he's not even cooperating or communicating with investigators. He's only going through his attorney at this point and had hired an investigator of his own for the case. Stephen would do a bunch of interviews with any journalist that asked, but he only communicated with the investigators through his attorneys via fax. He wouldn't even speak to them. Tara's co-workers denied any allegations that she had an affair with her boss or anyone else in their company. Reporters would repeatedly ask the sheriff's department whether Stephen was a suspect in press conferences, and although they maintained that he wasn't, investigators on the case were frustrated by his lack of assistance. One of the sheriffs said, "You'd think that he would be right there at our side, waiting to get all the information he could get from us. But he hasn't called us once. Think about it, he called us and said his wife is missing. But since then he hasn't called once to ask how the investigation is going or if we have any new information. That is weird." The sheriff's department said they were getting support from other family members and from Tara's workplace. The only person who was not cooperating was Stephen Grant. But in his defense, like I said, not that I want to defend him, I despise this man. He believes they think he's guilty of something. Even his attorney said so. So in that case, it would be hard to trust the police. In another press conference, the sheriff's department stated that they were comparing Stephen's account of what he said happened and checking it against other accounts for discrepancies. According to Stephen's first account and statement on February 14th, Tara had never disappeared without letting him know. However, when he was doing interviews in the media, he said that Tara had left him twice before without letting him know, and she was gone for days before returning. The sheriff's department explained that Stephen told investigators he heard her say, "I'll be right out," before she left the house on February 9th, even though Tara hadn't called anyone on her cell phone or received any calls at that time, according to her own phone records. Something wasn't adding up. Was Tara lying? Was she pretending that she was on a phone call so that she could avoid telling Stephen where she was going? Had she planned this all along? Was there a car waiting outside already? Now Tara's phone was completely off. As Verena returned to Germany, Stephen's sister Kelly traveled to Washington Township to help him with Lindsay and Ian, who were only 4 and 6 years old at that time. She lived nearby with her husband Chris in Sterling Heights, and Kelly spoke to the press about her missing sister-in-law. She distributed a bunch of missing persons flyers and tried to protect the children from the media attention, which was looking like quite a circus to her. "He looks plastic, there's no tears," she said. Several news outlets compared Stephen to Scott Peterson, who was convicted of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn child Connor in 2004. In the same way that the media was analyzing Scott during the search for Lacey, the press analyzed Stephen's demeanor and his lack of assistance in Tara's investigation. When Stephen heard that he was being compared to a convicted wife killer, he actually replied with, "I thought Scott Peterson was guilty too, so I get why everyone is looking at me as a suspect." According to Stephen, his retired FBI agent private investigator was talking to him daily. He told the media, however, that the police were the ones not cooperating with his private investigator. Stephen couldn't understand why the police would do that. He said, "It's not like the person we hired is a nobody. He's a former FBI agent." But a Macomb County Sheriff's Department spokesperson responded to Stephen's claim, saying, "It's not that we're not sharing information with a private investigator. We never had any communication with a private investigator. They've never reached out to us." When Stephen's ex-girlfriend Dina heard that Tara was missing, she sent the investigators all of those racy emails that were exchanged only 1 month earlier. They hadn't found the emails before because Stephen refused to let them check his home computer. He only gave them 2 of Tara's laptops. Stephen's attorney said Stephen did not turn over the computer because it had private information regarding business correspondences, and that Tara rarely used that computer. Like it matters, they're looking for things that he did. Search teams were combing through neighbors' backyards and into a big park that's close to the neighborhood, looking for any sign of Tara. There was an article that went out in the Detroit Free Press on February 24th with the headline, "Search for Tara Lynn Grant to intensify today." And then in bigger bold words, it said, "We're looking for a body." They showed a map with approximate locations for the Grant's home as well as Stony Creek Metro Park, which is a popular 4,000-acre park with a 500-acre creek running through it. It's frequented by many locals, including Tara, who used to jog there on a regular basis. It has a lot to do: hiking, camping, fishing, swimming, and so much more. 150 searchers were sent out there and were also sent to about a 2 to 3 mile radius from the couple's home. Once again, Stephen refused to help. He said it was because of a recent falling out with the sheriff's department. Despite the desperate pleas and the search efforts from Tara's family and friends, weeks went by and she was still missing. Those who loved her began to lose hope that they would ever find her, especially alive. Investigators at this point suspected foul play. They had their sights set on Stephen. However, they couldn't get into that home without a search warrant, and they did not have evidence to obtain one. After 3 weeks without new tips or leads, Tara's case was at a standstill until 34-year-old Sheila Warner was out for a hike in the woods on February 28th. That day, Sheila went for this walk along a 1-mile stretch near her home in Washington Township in the Stony Creek Park area. By this point, Tara's disappearance had made national headlines. Sheila was aware that there was an investigation going on for the missing mother, and since she knew that the police had searched this exact area where she was walking, she had her eye out for anything suspicious. And so, good thing she did. As she scanned the ground where she was walking, she noticed a plastic baggie tucked away in a tree behind some branches. Sheila's interest in this bag was piqued by what was inside: blood-soaked items. It looked as though blood had actually pooled at the bottom of this bag. She noticed rubber gloves, metal shavings, and several other baggies inside this plastic bag. With her mitten-covered hand, Sheila lifted the bag, carried it home, and placed it in the freezer. She then called the police. Investigators were hoping that this plastic bag with blood-soaked items in it would lead them to answers about Tara's disappearance. Some investigators said the bag probably had nothing to do with her disappearance, but others believed it did, especially because it contained those metal shavings. The metal shavings looked like the ones found in a tool and die shop, and we know whose father owns one of those, don't we? The sheriff's office sent out teams to search through the park again, starting in the area where the bag was found. At the time of Tara's disappearance, Michigan State Crime Lab was taking several months to return DNA results. However, the investigators sent out the Ziploc bag for testing on priority. The lab notified the investigators that some preliminary results were back the following day. The blood inside the bag was indeed human. After learning this fact, that it contained human blood, investigators obtained a search warrant for Stephen and Tara's Washington Township home. Around 5 p.m., detectives went to the home equipped with ultraviolet lights and luminol to look for blood. I'm kind of surprised that all they had to do was prove that this random bag in the woods had human blood in it, to get a search warrant for the residence. They were still waiting for the actual DNA results from inside the bag to confirm whether or not it was Tara's blood. But Stephen gave a 100-minute interview to the Detroit News that night. Stephen referred to Tara in the past tense throughout this entire interview. When he was asked to describe her as a mother, Stephen said she loved her children but traveled a lot. He said that people would say she's gone 5 days a week, she's only there on the weekends, and it wasn't weird for her to come in, kiss the kids, and leave again. He said, "I'm sorry, is that a good mother?" "No, it's not. That's a bad mother." Since when does that make someone a bad mother? Like actually being productive and having a really successful career. Stephen continued to disparage his missing wife. He would say things like, "People think she was the perfect mother. I was a better mom than Tara was. There's no other way to put it. I was the mom in the house. She was gone all the time. If the kids needed someone to take them to swimming or school or soccer practice, I took them. I'm thinking it's your responsibility. You're the father." Later in this interview, Stephen discussed his in-laws' reaction to Tara's disappearance. He said some of her family had said in the media how much she loved her kids and how she would fly back in order to attend their functions, but that's not true. He said, "I can't recall one time she did that." He also admitted he had power struggles over who the head of the household was. During the same interview with the Detroit News, Stephen discussed a racy email that he discovered between Tara and her ex-boyfriend. According to Stephen, she was cheating and he confronted her. They had an argument and then had to go to marriage counseling. According to him, his trust in Tara had returned after the marriage counseling was over, and that's when he finally stopped questioning her about her cheating. When Stephen was asked about how he felt about Tara's successful career, her high salary, and her work with the Washington group, he became defensive. He responded, "I work for my dad. It's a family business, a major auto supplier. It's a small company, but I make a good salary. It's not like Tara supports me." Following this interview, Stephen was asked if it was possible to record a second one in his garage. However, that interview never happened. After the interview, Stephen drove home and was greeted by investigators and the press. When investigators told Stephen that they had a search warrant for his home, he handed over his house key and then called his attorney. He put his attorney on the phone with the investigators, and the attorney asked them if Stephen was under arrest. They said no, that Stephen was free to leave. That's when he decided he wanted to take Bentley, the family dog, for a walk, and the police did not follow him. Stephen walked away from his home, and a cameraman with Channel 4 News focused on him as the snowstorm was raging in the background. Stephen and Bentley were caught in the camera's view before disappearing among the swirling snowflakes. Once Stephen was out of sight of the police and the media, he called a friend who lived a few miles away and explained, "You know what? They're going through my house. They've got the search warrant. Can you come pick me up?" So he did. He got Stephen and Bentley into his car and started to make his way back to his home. On the way to his friend's home, the friend noticed that Stephen was acting really strange. His hands were shaking, and he was looking over his shoulder like someone was following them. When Stephen got to his friend's house, he said, "I really want to see Lindsay and Ian, who were at his sister's house at the time." So he asked his friend, "Can I borrow your truck?" The friend said sure. So Stephen drove away with his dog and his friend's truck. As investigators were combing through the Grants' home looking for anything of evidentiary value, they made their way to the garage, the one where he never did that second interview. That is when Sergeant McLean saw a container that looked a little out of place to her. She signaled for Detective Kozlowski to come take a look. It was this green plastic bin, this Rubbermaid container, and it looked like it had a black tarp over it. Detective Kozlowski opened the lid of that container, and inside he found what looked like a bunch of plastic bags, with the outermost being a black garbage bag. There was definitely something inside. He just didn't know what it was. He took his gloved hand and kind of laid it on top, touching the exterior of the bag. Whatever was in it felt soft to the touch. At first, he didn't want to open the bag. He thought it might be salt for ice on the freezing Michigan streets, but after poking at it a few times, he decided to tear open the plastic bag to see what was inside. There was just something about it that gave him this uneasy feeling. What he discovered was absolutely horrifying. While looking inside that black garbage bag, the detective thought, I don't know why, but my first thought was that it was a deer carcass. Why would it be in this container? I don't know. But then, upon closer inspection, he noticed a bra and then clothing. Everyone in that garage heard an audible reaction from him, and they rushed over to gather around this container. After tearing open the remainder of the garbage bag, the detective discovered the dismembered torso of what appeared to be a woman's body. 5 bags were found on the scene by the medical examiner. They contained remnants of women's clothing. The remains were severed, and the container had what was left from the neck to the top of the thighs, including a bra, panties, and a part of a pair of pants. It was obvious to the investigators that they had just located Tara Grant, what was left of her. It had to be Stephen. It had to be, and his whereabouts were unknown at this time. Investigators were concerned for the safety of other people. Tara's family, do you know, Hardy, his ex-girlfriend who disclosed those emails. 1:30. An officer called Tara's sister and her husband in Ohio and told them to return to Michigan immediately. The officer informed Alicia that they had discovered evidence that Tara had been met with foul play, but they saved the gory details. They wanted to be face-to-face with Alicia. When her family arrived back in Michigan the next morning and checked into a hotel, the investigator met them there and told Eric and Alicia in that hotel room what they found in Stephen and Tara's garage. Alicia let out a scream. I feel so bad for Tara's family. Afterwards, investigators actually said to the media, you can't even imagine breaking that news to a family member that their loved one is dead, but also torn apart, and that all of them wasn't accounted for. On Saturday morning, investigators searched Stony Creek again, where Sheila found the Ziploc bag. They were hoping to discover even more evidence and the rest of Tara's body. Approximately 100 officers from several agencies were involved in this search. While they were walking through Stony Creek, an officer found an object near a tree. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human body part. It was Tara's thigh. After that, another officer discovered her head under a tree stump. Within minutes, the investigators called the medical examiner's office and instructed them to get to Stony Creek right away. When a medical examiner's technician arrived at Stony Creek, they had to remove the head. There was no question. It was Tara Grant. Michigan was experiencing frigid weather in February 2007. Due to the below-freezing temperatures, Tara's body was very well preserved. While searching Stony Creek, law enforcement officers found a right hand, a bone they thought was a femur, and a left hand. However, there was nothing left but bone because animals had already gotten to it. They also found a hollowed-out part of a log, where they discovered a foot and a lower leg. At that point, the investigators decided it was time to stop the search because it was sunset. Their superiors instructed all officers and canine units to leave that night and return the next morning. Officers were stationed around the area overnight to keep it secure, while the medical examiner took the parts they had found back to the office. There was still no word about where Stephen was. He was driving all over the state at that time. As I was reading this, I couldn't help but worry about their poor little dog, too. It was freezing outside, and he was on the run with his evil owner. Stephen made a stop and bought alcohol, razor blades, sleeping pills, a cap gun, and a magic marker. He wrote letters to both of his children. The toy pistol he bought was red, but he used the magic marker to paint it black so it would appear real. He hoped that he would show it to an officer if he got stopped and that he wouldn't have to take his own life. Instead, it would be taken by a cop. To narrow down their search for the missing suspect, the police followed phone pings from Stephen's phone when he decided to call his sister during that drive. Stephen also made several withdrawals from ATMs, creating an electronic paper trail that investigators were following. They were searching for Stephen when they received a phone call from Verena. She told investigators that she had just hung up with Stephen. The phone had been ringing while she was asleep. When she picked it up, she was shocked to hear Stephen telling her that he had killed Tara. She was half asleep and trying to process what he was saying, but he did say it was an accident. Verena told the detectives that Stephen confessed that when Tara came home from Puerto Rico on February 9th, he was upset with her. They got into an argument and she smacked Stephen in the face. When this happened, he pushed her and she slipped and fell, hitting her head. That's when he realized she was dead. He ran over to check on her, couldn't believe it, and hid her body. The task force was sent out on this windy, cold, snowy day to search for Stephen. Investigators had night vision equipment, and at 7 p.m., they spotted his vehicle. Less than 2 hours later, it was parked next to a footpath leading to Sturgeon Bay near Wilderness State Park, where he and Tara used to spend time together. After midnight, several law enforcement agencies secured the area around Michigan's Lake Huron and continued searching for Stephen. Hours later, they found him lying under a pine tree. He was suffering from hypothermia. He was barefoot, without a coat, hat, or gloves, and was semi-conscious. He was hearing things, seeing things, and talking to trees. Despite being dazed and covered in scratches and scrapes, Stephen was able to tell the officers that he had also ingested a bunch of Adderall, a stimulant used to treat ADHD. Where's the dog? I just kept thinking, where's the dog? Finally, he was airlifted to Northern Michigan Hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with frostbite and hypothermia. His body temperature was 87.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 10 or 11 degrees below normal. Although this low body temperature could potentially cause kidney issues and other problems, he was not in any immediate danger. So that afternoon, Stephen's attorney found out everything that happened. And guess what happens? He recused himself. The only vow he was going to make was to assist his former client, Stephen Grant, in finding a replacement. When asked why he was stepping down, he replied, "I have to look at myself in the mirror in the morning." Damn, so he actually has morals. Dr. Daniel Spitz, the Macomb County medical examiner, conducted the autopsy on the torso that they had found. He was no ordinary medical examiner either. His experience in pathology included high-profile murder cases, such as the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the murder of 6-year-old John Bennett Ramsey. The preliminary results of the autopsy confirmed that the torso from the garage did indeed belong to Tara Grant, and the doctor determined her cause of death was strangulation. After conducting DNA tests on the remains found in Stony Creek Park, Dr. Spitz was able to confirm what everyone already knew. The body parts were those of Tara Grant. Because they were exposed to the cold outdoors for several weeks, they were preserved very well, even though some of the limbs did show evidence of animal activity. They only found 11 of Tara's 14 missing body parts. Her lower left leg, right arm, and right foot were still missing. However, they were able to recover a few of these saw blades, and they had Tara's skin on them. Lindsay and Ian were removed from Stephen's sister Kelly's home in Sterling Heights at this point and placed with Tara's sister Alicia and her husband Eric. After completing all the tests, Dr. Spitz transferred Tara's remains to Crawford Funeral Home. This is the same funeral parlor that Stephen surprised her at when her grandma died. Tara's family and friends couldn't help how sad they were at her funeral service. Tara's daughter Lindsay sat there, emotionless, and Tara's son just sucked his thumb the entire time. The funeral service was scheduled for the day after visitation at First Lutheran Church. Now, Tara's family avoided using the chapel that they really wanted because that is where Stephen and Tara got married, so they avoided it on purpose. She was laid to rest in the Gardens of Rest Cemetery in Wells, Michigan. Her sister Alicia wrote a wonderful tribute that appeared on the front page of the Dutch Free Press. She never mentioned her sister's marriage once in that entire article. When Stephen Grant was stable, he gave a detailed and lengthy account of what transpired when Tara Grant died. Sergeant McLean and Detective Kozlowski heard Stephen describe how everything unfolded. First, he called Tara in Puerto Rico several times the night before her flight on Friday, February 9th. When Tara landed at Newark Airport for her layover, she called and left a voicemail letting him know her plane had landed and she was safe. She told him that she would probably arrive in Michigan later than expected because of her layover. As a result of Tara's constant absence from the home, Stephen said he was already annoyed with her. 1 week before her murder, Stephen told investigators that he and Tara discussed her work schedule, and she informed him she was working hard to get to a point where she wouldn't have to travel as much. But eventually, Tara did make it home that Friday night while Verena was out at the club. As Tara unpacked her luggage, Stephen was naked, standing there getting ready for bed, and she was packing another one. According to him, they were discussing Tara's travel schedule again, and while he was getting into bed talking to Tara, he said that she was leaving early Sunday instead of Monday. It really irritated him when she said that her boss Lou was going to be there. She even said, "You know what? You can't go. I'm sick of it." When he confronted Tara saying, "You know what? You spend way too much time with him already and you don't spend enough time with us," allegedly Tara responded by cursing at him and saying, "Too bad. I do what I have to do for my job and it's none of your business." After that, he said Tara turned around and Stephen admitted to grabbing her by the wrist. She slapped him across the face. While they were standing outside the bathroom in their main bedroom, he said that once Tara hit him, he didn't know what to do. He hit her back, and then he couldn't really remember what happened after that. He thought she fell and maybe banged her head on the floor. Stephen explained that Tara was furious and threatened to leave him, taking Lindsay and Ian with her. She told him, "You're going to be homeless." In a fit of rage, Stephen told the detectives he wrapped his hands around Tara's throat. They asked if Tara was fighting back, and he said no, there wasn't that much fighting. While he had his hands around her neck, Stephen didn't look at her face. He confessed that she tried grabbing him, but it was too late. He knew he was going to go to prison for attempted murder anyway, so he just kept going. He then grabbed an item of clothing and put it over her face so he didn't have to look at her dying. After about 4 minutes with his hands on her neck, Tara stopped moving, and that's when he realized she was dead. He started crying and texted Verena not to come home. Then Stephen wrapped a brown leather belt around Tara's throat and used this belt as a leash because he couldn't pick her up. While still nude, he dragged her body down the stairs. She was too heavy for him to move by himself. All the while, the children were steps away. While all this was taking place, he continued to drag her into their freezing cold garage. He told detectives what she was wearing: black pants and a silver shirt. He did his best to get her limp body into the trunk of her Isuzu Trooper, but at one point, he admitted he dropped her, and her head hit the hard cement. He said it was the most disgusting noise he'd ever heard, like dropping a watermelon. But he finally got her inside and covered her up with the cargo liner from his Jeep. As Stephen was hiding his dead wife's body, he heard the door open, so he ran back inside and told Verena that Tara left him after an argument. When Verena noticed that he had a scratch on his nose, Stephen said that Tara tried to hit him. That's when he started doing things to cover his tracks. Remember all those calls and voice messages to Tara? Yeah, he did that while her dead body was inside the back of her own vehicle. The very next thing Stephen told Verena was that he had to drive to his father's metal and dye shop to work the next day. So that morning, he woke up, called his dad, and made sure he wasn't coming into work. Al Grant, his dad, said he wasn't going to be in that afternoon due to a prior plan. So Stephen drove Tara's car with her body in the back to his dad's shop. He also brought a bow saw and a plastic tarp. After Stephen arrived at his father's shop, he told investigators that he shredded all of Tara's belongings or documents. He even tried to break her computer, but wasn't able to cut her. He didn't think he could. He didn't think the bow saw would do the job. But he got a bottle of liquor from his house and drank some of it before doing what he did to her body. He still couldn't bring himself to cut her, so instead, he cut up all her belongings. His goal was to make it appear as though she just vanished. He had to trash everything he could, since Tara would never travel without her phone, her laptop, her computer bag. Stephen got rid of all of that. He dumped her suitcase in a dumpster near his childhood home. Later, Stephen remembered his father had a hacksaw in the office. The blades were straight and an inch wide. Stephen told investigators that he found a piece of an old hacksaw that he broke off, wrapped it in a cloth, and used it to cut apart his wife. He started with the hands, joint by joint, and then moved to the legs, joint by joint. He said he threw up twice during the process, but to keep himself going, he kept telling himself, if you don't do this, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. He should have been telling himself that before this. After he took Tara apart, Stephen placed all the parts in garbage bags and then into the Rubbermaid container that they found during the search of his home. He said the blood was thick like syrup. Then he drove Tara's car out of the shop with the container in the back, along with all the other stuff, the laptop, the belongings, all in this container. The very next day on Sunday, he told detectives that he tried to make it seem like everything was normal. He played with Lindsay and Ian and Verena that day. He admitted flirting with her and described her as a nice girl that helped him through this entire thing he was going through. Then he placed his kid's snow sled in the back of Tara's Trooper along with a bucket. Eventually, he parked his truck near Stony Creek Park and placed the sled on the ground with the container with his wife's remains on top. Once everything was steady, he started to pull it up a hill, but then he tells the investigators he lost control of the sled halfway down the slope. He has the audacity, he's so gross. He refers to it as a scene from Keystone Cops, a show about incompetent police officers and their humorous situations on the job. That's what he's comparing this ordeal to. He tells them he began to chase Tara's remains down the hill. Finally, the sled stopped about 100 yards away, rolled over, toppled on its side, and the container opened up, scattering Tara's body parts on the snow. He didn't know what to do. Stephen just buried the parts all over, including her torso, under the snow at this park, scattering them around. Even parts of the blade, he said he would just throw an item as far as possible into the forest, hoping that animals would take care of the rest. Later that day, Stephen drove home and pretended everything was normal again, just playing with the kids like nothing ever happened. When Stephen heard that the sheriff was planning to search Stony Creek for evidence of Tara's disappearance, he freaked out. He panicked, knowing they were going to find the torso. It wasn't buried well, it was big. So that morning, when the officers were scheduled to search the park, he ran out of his house on foot. His mom was staying with the kids, and he didn't want her to hear the car starting because then she would get suspicious. So from his house, he jogged to the park where he found her torso buried in the plastic garbage bag. The detectives asked how he carried the torso back to the garage, and he said, "I just put it over my shoulder." Once he was home, he drove to his father's dye shop and hid the torso on the roof of the building. Nobody saw this, and while he's telling all this to investigators, he has no remorse. He's not crying, he's laughing, making jokes about it. And after picking up the Rubbermaid container from his house, Stephen drove to his father's place, put the torso back inside, and then took it back to the garage. Then he explained how, the very next day after he was doing the interview with Detroit News, he was pulled over by an officer. That's when he was informed that they had a search warrant for his home. The timing of that search warrant was perfect because he had just moved Tara to this new location in the garage. Had they had to wait, who knows where he would have put her next. When Stephen left the Grant family home in Washington Township with his dog, he drove to Kelly's, his sister's house in Sterling Heights, to say goodbye to his kids. At Kelly's house, Stephen left Bentley behind. "I had to let you know what happened to little Bentley. He's alive and well. What he was looking for," he told investigators during the interview, "was a gun. He planned to take his own life." Stephen continued driving throughout Michigan after stopping at Kelly's house in Sterling Heights. Then he was near Flint at one point before going to Lansing. On his way to Lansing, that's when he stopped to pick up everything. The blades, the sleeping pills. He explained how he parked his vehicle in the forest and walked into the woods. His last memory was sitting under the tree, feeling frozen. Stephen was asked if he truly believed that Tara had been cheating on him with Lou, and he said, "No. From the bottom of my heart, no." When investigators asked if Tara knew about Stephen's indecencies with Verena, he said, "No, Tara was ignorant of what was happening. If only she knew how evil this man really was." In May 2007, Tara's sister Alicia filed a petition to permanently terminate Stephen's parental rights, and she also filed a petition to adopt Lindsay and Ian. the children were living with Stephen's sister Kelly, who pledged not to fight for custody. However, by the time May came around, Kelly decided she wanted to adopt Lindsay and Ian because, according to her, the kids were more comfortable with Stephen's family. Kelly made it painfully clear that she did not want Lindsay and Ian to live with Tara's sister. Sheila, the woman who found the plastic bag, was actually awarded. She received the recognition award for her help with the case. But she did speak about her concerns about testifying against Stephen in his upcoming murder trial. She said, "I'm not afraid of him. He looks to me like a cowardly person." There was a wrongful death lawsuit filed by Alicia and her husband Eric, and a judge awarded Tara's estate $50 million. The money Stephen owed them wasn't even of interest to them. What they wanted in this lawsuit was to prevent Stephen from profiting from any future books or movie deals, and they got their wish. He wouldn't. Officials in Ohio, where Alicia and Eric lived, recommended Kelly not to see the children. In an interview with the Detroit News, Kelly said her brother wanted his children to move with her, not Alicia, like he should have a choice. This man murdered their mother. Kelly had been complaining about the fact that Alicia had told Lindsay and Ian about what happened to their mother. Kelly had a problem with that. She said that these children were going to be scarred forever. Kelly couldn't have children of her own, so that might have been one reason she really wanted to have her brother's children. But this also meant it would give Stephen's parents access to the children, and that was kind of controversial. Kelly kept arguing that Alicia was not giving Stephen's family the same respect, and I understand. It's hard not to blame this man's family. I don't, but at the same time, it would be hard to trust them at the very least, especially when they're keeping in touch with Stephen while he was incarcerated. Kelly and Stephen had many phone conversations, and it didn't paint either of them in a very positive light. During one of these conversations, Kelly told her brother, "It's not like you're Jeffrey Dahmer." Stephen responded to his sister by saying, "Yeah, but that's what I don't know. It just bugs me that people think I'm a monster. They don't think, they know you're a monster." In another conversation, Kelly told her brother she wanted to dispose of his clothing because she was afraid that someone was going to steal it and sell it on eBay. She told Stephen that she would make sure the clothes were safe in her basement and she would put them in containers. As a disgusting and sickening joke, Stephen responded with, "There are a lot of Rubbermaid containers in the house." Sorry, what a sick and heartless man. After attending Tara's funeral, Kelly called Stephen and told him Turning Point, an organization that helps women who suffer from harm at the hands of their loved ones, could be a woman or man, domestic issues. They hosted the service at Stony Creek. They were talking about the domestic issues at the hands of her brother and how this went on for many years against Tara, which ultimately ended in her murder. And he was furious. Stephen was mad. He told Kelly, "You should have set the record straight. You should have told them it was the other way around." Kelly said, "Well, I can't bash the dead woman right now," but she said, "Yeah, she was the most emotionally abusive I'd ever met. I can't say that right now, but she was a puppet master." Yeah, you shouldn't say that. It's crazy how they talk such ill words of the dead. Stephen even had the audacity to ask Kelly if anyone mentioned him during the funeral, and Kelly said, "No, it's like you don't even exist anymore. There were no pictures of you, not even from your wedding day." Since Tara was a victim of a domestic altercation, everyone released purple balloons and they wore purple ribbons. Kelly was joking about this, saying they should have handed out barf bags in every pew. According to Kelly, their mother wanted to know why Stephen didn't just Tara's body in the trunk and park the car at the airport. His own mother was saying this stuff. One of the most disgusting things that Stephen Grant's sister Kelly said about her murdered sister-in-law was, "I would like to know, and this is very disgusting, if they put her back together in her coffin." Stephen replied, joking around, "They probably laid her out that way too." And then they started discussing whether they thought Tara was dressed that way when they put on her clothing with all the severed parts, or whether they put them back together. All the while, I can't believe they're saying this because they're being recorded. The prosecution eventually obtained these phone conversations between Stephen Grant and his sister. After the judge reviewed them, he ruled they were admissible in court as evidence, and it shocked Stephen and Kelly when they learned that their heinous, disgusting, and downright hateful conversations could be used against Stephen. That was shocking. How about this man just brutally took the life of the mother of his children? That's what's shocking. In another recorded phone call, Stephen told Kelly that his attorney had listened to their phone conversations. Stephen said, "He says it sounds like I'm not respectful enough about the whole situation, but what are you gonna do?" I told him we're just talking how we talk anyway, but he said they're going to make it look bad. Kelly agreed. She said, "You're not taking it lightly. It's a very serious thing. It's a horrible, horrible thing. Nobody's taking it lightly." Well, I disagree. On November 27, 2007, the first day of jury selection, Stephen Grant's murder trial began. Stephen appeared in court looking different from usual, with a new haircut, new clothes, and the bugged-out expression that's usually in his eyes was less noticeable. He usually had these bulging, prominent green eyes, I'm sure you've noticed, but they had him tone it down. Stephen's attorney told him to relax his eyelid so they wouldn't look as spooky because his eyes could distract the jury. During Stephen's news interviews, while Tara was missing, those eyes would freak people out. Even when he was in jail, the inmates would tease him about his wide-eyed expression and wanted him to do the Stephen Grant eyes all the time. At jury selection, Stephen's attorney announced that his client wanted to plead guilty to the charge of mutilating a dead body. So the court called Stephen to the stand, where he confessed, "I mutilated a dead body." It's believed that Stephen's attorney wanted him to plead guilty to this charge to keep the fact that he dismembered her from coming up in court. How are they going to leave that fact out, really? The trial began immediately after jury selection. As part of his opening statement, the prosecutor said that Stephen had left several messages on Tara's phone following her murder to cover up the crime. The prosecutor also told the jury they would hear these messages that Stephen left. Among these calls was one that he made after he'd taken Tara apart and placed her in a container. This was the call where he said that she owed her children a phone call. He was well aware that he had just got her into pieces. Stephen's lawyer admitted during the opening arguments that it's true Tara's murder was a tragic and horrible crime and that Stephen Grant murdered his wife Tara. But it was up to the jury to decide the details. According to the defense, the events of February 9, 2007 were a result of a pot that had simmered for too long, and it finally boiled out of control when Stephen took a hacksaw to his wife. His attorney said he did so out of fear and desperation to hide his wife's death. It wasn't planned. This was only a reaction to what had happened. Alicia, Tara's sister, was the first witness of the day to begin. She explained the relationship between herself and her late sister. According to Alicia, they were best friends. Despite that, she traveled so much. Tara spent as much time as possible with Lindsay and Ian and the people she loved the most. When Alicia cleaned out Tara's belongings after the murder, she found a ton of cards that Tara had exchanged with her children. There was no doubt that Tara was a wonderful mother. She also said Tara told her that she was returning to Puerto Rico on Monday, not a day earlier, like Stephen had claimed. She said Stephen made that part up. There were no plans for her to leave any earlier. On cross-examination, Stephen's lawyer asked Alicia about her brother-in-law's fatherhood. In her opinion, she admitted Stephen was an attentive parent. He took care of the children's daily needs, but Alicia was shocked when the defense attorney asked, "Did Tara ever mention that she wanted to stop being so dominant and controlling in the marriage?" She defended Tara and told the defense attorney Tara wasn't dominant in her marriage simply because she was the breadwinner. The next witness was Lou, Tara's boss. During his testimony, he stated he had known Tara since 1994. Their relationship was professional. According to Lou, Stephen called him on Monday, February 12th, to ask where Tara was. Lou told the jury in court that Tara was due back to work that day and said he never requested that she return to Puerto Rico. Later that night, Stephen called again asking when someone was legally considered missing. Lou was baffled that Stephen hadn't already told authorities that Tara was missing. After Sergeant McLean testified in her statement, she said that Tara did not make any phone calls from her cell phone or her home phone at the time that Stephen claimed she did on February 9th. Verena came into the mix and had to fly back to Michigan from Germany. She was at the top of the prosecution's star witness list, and she was brave. She was asked a few personal questions like her name and age by the prosecutor, and after that, the prosecution delved into her and Stephen's relationship. She told them everything about how he was confiding in her, about Tara's indifference in the marriage, and his bizarre nude encounters with her. She even told the jury that Stephen asked her to wash the sheets in the main bedroom before Tara got home that night. She heard him leaving Tara mean messages. Looking back, she now realizes that Tara was dead when Stephen was making those disturbing calls, and that's just horrifying. She said the reason she didn't say anything to investigators is because at the time, she really did think she was protecting an innocent man. She didn't say anything about the relationship because she was convinced that Stephen did this by accident. But she also said how Stephen was laying in bed with her that night, holding her and kissing her the entire night before she had to return to Germany. When she did, he told her, "You need to create a new email address and a new phone because authorities are monitoring." When she was asked whether she loved him, Verena said that she thought she did. After Verena's testimony, Sheila Warner took the stand and described what it was like finding that plastic bag full of bloody debris while she was hiking. On February 28th, the prosecution presented Stephen as a power-hungry, fame-seeking psychopath. According to the prosecutor, Stephen just reveled in all the attention he was getting from Tara's murder. He did try to argue that Stephen premeditated the murder because he hit Tara during the argument and decided to silence her, and that this was a conscious choice. But in his argument, the prosecutor pointed out how Stephen covered Tara's face while strangling her because he didn't want to see her. According to him, that was just another sign that Stephen was thinking clearly at the time. It took 4 minutes, which gave Stephen enough time to contemplate what he was doing. The defense portrayed Stephen in a different light. They described him as a homemaker involved in the children's activities. According to the defense, Stephen finally snapped after years of anger and frustration caused by Tara's demeaning nature. Although it was tragic, it wasn't first-degree murder. Stephen didn't plot his wife's murder. They said it was voluntary manslaughter because of the argument. The jury left the courtroom to deliberate on Stephen's fate. Around 2:30 p.m. On the second day of deliberation, the jury informed the court that they had reached a verdict. As the foreman spoke, he announced they found Stephen Grant guilty of second-degree murder. According to the foreman, the jurors tried so hard to find a reason to convict Stephen of first-degree murder, but they said that doing so would go against the judge's directions. They agreed Stephen had not premeditated the murder of his wife. What are your thoughts following Stephen's conviction? His parental rights were taken away, and Kelly and Alicia met with a judge. They agreed on a custody deal. It was decided Alicia would have primary custody of Lindsay and Anne, but Kelly was allowed to visit. That didn't sit right with me. After everything she said, it just didn't feel right. According to the book Limb from Limb, prosecutors who tried Stephen Grant's case revealed he was exchanging letters with a woman named Jennifer, an inmate imprisoned for killing her 8- and 5-year-old daughters. They released notes that Stephen had written to Crystal Conklin, another female prisoner accused of fatally beating her toddler. One letter from the woman named Jennifer asked if Stephen missed Tara, and Stephen replied that he did miss her very much. He said she, for the past 13 years, had been the one he went to with all his problems, and now he didn't have that person to ask for advice. That's what he missed, and he drew a little sad face at the end of the note. Stephen did begin to keep a journal for Lindsay and Ian. He wanted them to read it later in life. In Limb from Limb, it claims that Stephen was writing the book so his children could learn about where they came from the two people who loved them and each other. Really, 2 people. Stephen's jailhouse calls and letters were not brought up in the trial, and the jury never got to take them into account with their verdict. Nevertheless, these conversations had a huge impact on public opinion. The court of public opinion, along with all the offensive jokes and the way that Stephen and his sister discussed things, how they were going to develop everything into a book and a movie and keep all the profits, and not give anything to Tara's family in this devious plan. The siblings suggested that Stephen actually dictate the book to Kelly, and then she would make sure everything got produced by Lifetime. During this conversation, Stephen mentioned a Beverly Hills attorney who could make their book deals and their movie deals for them. He then imagined who would portray him in a movie, and according to him, Adrian Brody, the Academy Award-winning actor, would be perfect for Stephen Grant. Kelly told him, no, he's a little too famous for Lifetime. Let's tone it down a little." The prosecution revealed in February 2008 that Lindsay and Ian had witnessed their father murder their mother on Christmas Day. Lindsay told her aunt Alicia that she and her brother saw Stephen terrifying the night Tara died. In detail, the poor 7-year-old described how her father choked her mother to death. "That beyond breaks my heart, my goodness." But Stephen's family, on the other hand, denies that that ever happened. How would they know? Were they there? Because these children were at Stephen's sentencing hearing, Tara's brother-in-law Eric made a victim impact statement. He described her as one of the most generous people he had ever met, and she was his wife's best friend. He called Stephen Tara's Achilles heel since the day he met Stephen at Alicia and Tara's grandmother's funeral years ago. Eric told the court that Stephen gave him a bad feeling. In one instance, he found Stephen screaming at his 18-month-old son in his crib. The infant was crying and frightened, and Eric said even my son realized that Stephen was a monster. Tara's mother Mary also gave an impact statement. She asked the judge if she could speak directly to her former son-in-law. The judge said, "You're not really supposed to talk to the defendant, but I assure you he's in the courtroom and he can hear you." As she looked in Stephen's direction, she told him she would never forgive him for killing her daughter. Never. Alicia presented the judge with 2 of Lindsay's drawings during her victim impact statement. Among the drawings was a picture of Lindsay drew of her mother's burial. Her father was depicted under a rock in the second drawing. Lindsay decorated the page where she wrote, "My dad thinks he has power. Those poor children." Tara's sister told the court, "In my opinion, Stephen Grant realized Tara had exceeded him as a person and as a professional." The judge spoke after the statements were made and said that they could give Stephen a life sentence, but that would mean he would be eligible for parole in only 15 years. So the judge ruled that sentence was not sufficient for the crimes committed. As a result, the judge handed down an indeterminate sentence, which would prevent Stephen from applying for parole until he at least served a minimum of 58 years. He's eligible for parole in 2058. The judge also required Stephen to pay $40,000 in court fees. Now here's something really sad. In June 2008, an individual called the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office at 1:40 p.m., reporting a self-inflicted death. When the police arrived at this location, a small town northeast of Detroit, they heard a gunshot coming from the back of the house. The officer ran back there and found William Al Grant, Stephen's father, dead on the floor with a rifle nearby. That's so sad. The ripple effects of Stephen's actions stretch so far. Stephen is now in his early 50s, incarcerated at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Michigan. All of his appeals have been dismissed by the court, but he's scheduled for release on March 3rd, 2057 at the earliest. I wanted to end on somewhat of a positive note. Lindsay and Ian, Tara's children, return to where their mother was killed every year to participate in Tara's walk. The walk is a chance for them to honor their mother and raise awareness for domestic situations. Lindsay, who still has her mom's beautiful curly hair, told the media, "I will always advocate therapy to anyone and everyone I meet. I wouldn't be the person I am today without the psychologists that I work with." Lindsay is currently a student at Ohio State University studying pediatric psychology, and she cites her experience as a patient in therapy for her reason for pursuing this degree and this field of study. Lindsay's interested in helping children affected by traumatic events or loss, and according to Lindsay, she has no desire to speak to her biological father, Stephen Grant. Ian attends college in Wisconsin and has never had any contact with his dad, which is something he doesn't want. Lindsay and Ian both use Tara's sister Alicia's and her husband's last name, which is Standifer. Imagine experiencing a sense of dread. I believe we can all recall a moment when something felt off. Some might refer to it as a premonition, while others might call it intuition or a gut instinct. Some may even view it as a divine message from God. In today's case, however, the woman foresaw her own murder just hours before it occurred. She confided in her loved ones that she had an ominous feeling that someone intended to take her life, and then it came true. This is one of those narratives that sends a shiver down your spine and prompts you to reevaluate everything and everyone around you. Let me start by introducing you to Valerie Reyes. She was born on April 9, 1994, in New Rochelle, New York, to her parents, S. Reyes and Norma Sanchez. She was one of 4 kids. She had an older brother and 2 younger brothers, the youngest of whom came along when Valerie was 17 and 19. But despite their age gap, Valerie was super close with her younger brothers, and she absolutely adored her older one. Being the only daughter, she was definitely her parents' little princess. New Rochelle is a vibrant and diverse suburb in Westchester County, New York, right by the Long Island Sound. Valerie grew up in a safe, quiet neighborhood where families had known each other for years. Her parents worked hard to give their kids a stable home environment, teaching them the importance of family, education, and working hard to make a better life. Valerie's family had strong Mexican roots, and their closeness and support for one another were at the heart of everything they did. Valerie fit right into this close-knit family, always prioritizing the ones that she loved. Growing up, Valerie enjoyed painting, loved animals, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian one day. When she was just 6 years old, the Journal News did an article on school diversity and featured Valerie. Even at the young age of 6, she showed her compassionate nature by helping her classmates with their Spanish. She said, "It's fun for me to teach them, like a teacher." That compassionate and selfless spirit was something that stuck with her throughout her life. Valerie went to New Rochelle High School, where she met her best friend, Jeffrey Anderson. They met when they were both 14, forming a bond that lasted well into their adult years. At school, Valerie quickly became known for her kind heart and her genuine care for others. She had this incredible ability to sense when something was wrong with someone, call it intuition, and she would always offer help at the right moment. She approached everything with warmth and empathy, making her incredibly approachable, even to people she didn't know. Valerie grew into a beautiful young woman with a bright smile, striking brown eyes, and a quiet, friendly nature. She wasn't the type to seek the spotlight, but she was a very talented person. Valerie also found joy in simple things, like hanging out with friends and family. Even though her little brothers could get on her nerves, she was also serious about her studies and was involved in plenty of after-school activities. Though friendly, her friends described her as more reserved, preferring smaller, intimate gatherings over big social events. Valerie's sweet and gentle nature matched her interests perfectly. Painting, reading, and writing are things you usually do by yourself in a quiet place, and she had a passion for spending time doing these things outdoors. She was the kind of person who loved deeply, always there for anyone who needed her. She was the type who would drop everything at a moment's notice to help someone she cared about. Her mom, Norma, often talked about Valerie's huge heart and how she was the kind of daughter every parent dreamed of, caring, loyal, and full of love. When Valerie graduated high school in 2012, she wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do with her life. College didn't seem to appeal to her at the time. It felt a little too restrictive for someone as free-spirited as she was. All she knew was that whatever she did, she wanted to use her creative talents. Her older brother was a tattoo artist, and she looked up to him so much that she began considering following in his footsteps. Valerie was an incredibly talented artist herself. She could draw spot-on portraits and would do this for her friends, family, and anyone she cared about. She even let her brother tattoo her arm, allowing him to practice his craft on her body, which alone shows how much she trusted and respected him. Valerie was also passionate about reading and could lose herself in a good book for hours. Her best friend Jeffrey would say that Valerie was a homebody at heart. She loved going to coffee shops with a book in hand or spending quiet nights sketching. Valerie was also a talented singer, though not many people knew about that since she kept many things very private. She wasn't one to boast, but she would open up to those she felt close to. Most of her closest friends were family members, like her cousins, aunts, and her maternal grandparents, Jose and Graciela Sanchez. They lived nearby, and Valerie loved spending time with them, often dropping by without notice, which was always a pleasant surprise. Of everyone in her life, her bond with her mom, Norma, was the strongest. Norma had Valerie when she was just 21, and as the only women in the household, they developed an unbreakable bond. Norma saw Valerie not just as her daughter, but as her best friend. Even after Valerie moved out and started living on her own, she would talk to her mom every single day. Sundays were always reserved for family time, which became Valerie's favorite day of the week, as it meant gathering at her parents' house with her older and younger brothers. They'd all catch up on each other's lives. Norma said her kids always looked forward to Sundays. Valerie would play board games and hide and seek with her younger brothers, sharing fun and silly moments together. Sometimes they'd grab a bite to eat, other times they'd go to the park. They'd do anything really, as long as they were with family. Those moments together meant everything to Valerie. Valerie worked hard to enjoy the things that mattered most to her. She was good at saving money, living by her mother's motto, "When you're at work, you do work." Her friends said that she had the soul of an artist, but the work ethic of a CEO. One of her first jobs after high school was at the local Costco, where she met Shell Ellis. This coworker quickly became a close friend. Shell admired Valerie's humility, noting that while Valerie was incredibly talented, she never craved attention for it. They clicked instantly. Shell said Valerie would draw freestyle while Shell cooked, and Shell had the honor of being one of Valerie's portrait subjects. Shell saw just how gifted Valerie truly was and was ecstatic when Valerie's brother got her a dummy arm to practice tattooing on. Shell could tell Valerie was thrilled to help him pursue his dream, while honing her own tattooing skills. As well, by the time she turned 21, Valerie had moved into the basement apartment at 34 Colonial Place in New Rel, staying close to her parents because she only lived 3 or 4 minutes away. It wasn't long before Valerie saw that a new bookstore, the Barnes & Noble, was opening soon, and it was only 15 minutes away in East Chester. She loved books. We know that she always carried them around with her, and she was looking for something new to dive into all the time. So when she saw this job being advertised at the bookstore, she applied right away and joined the very first team of employees when it opened for its grand opening. This included Lauren Bradford, who was 5 years younger than her. Valerie made quite an impression on Lauren, who was only a teenager at the time. In the 10 months that they worked together, before Lauren went off to college, Valerie shared her passion for art with her and her dreams of becoming a tattoo artist. Lauren remembered Valerie as a confidant, someone that you could really go to if you needed advice, and she encouraged Lauren to go after all of her aspirations. Lauren knew this was solid advice because it was obvious that Valerie had a good head on her shoulders and a very bright future ahead of her. She encouraged a lot of her friends to follow their dreams, including Michael Follow, who said if it wasn't for Valerie, he wouldn't have learned digital art. She saw his sketches, and she persuaded him to get an iPad and an Apple Pen and just to create. But behind Valerie's bright smile and her encouraging and compassionate nature, there were things that people didn't always see, a skeleton in the closet, so to speak. She struggled with bouts of depression and anxiety, something that many creative souls can actually relate to. Valerie often used art as a way to escape during those darker times. She was the type to retreat into her own world, surrounding herself with paintbrushes and pencils whenever life felt overwhelming. Valerie also found peace in nature, especially on long walks around Beachmont Lake. It was a beautiful area, perfect for sitting by the water on a bench under the trees and just watching the ducks swim by while listening to the water from the fountain hit the lake surface. It's really pretty in the winter as well, with all the snow and ice, Valerie would spend hours just sketching or soaking in the quiet calm. For her, it was the perfect way to reset. You can tell that Valerie's life was simple yet filled with love, laughter, and a strong sense of purpose. Reading and art were her escapes, a way to express herself without saying words or to find an expression for how she was feeling in someone else's words. As much as Valerie enjoyed the slower pace, she was also quite the hard worker. She worked as much as she could. Her boss and colleagues described her as someone who was always punctual, dependable, and respected. She was known to have a ferocious work ethic, and her customers adored her as well. They often commented on her friendly smile and her willingness to go the extra mile to help them find the perfect book. As a neighbor, Valerie kind of kept to herself for the most part, but she would still say hello when she saw her neighbors on Colonial Place. However, one of those neighbors ended up becoming a friend. Brenda DJ, a mother of 5, used to say hi to Valerie every now and then when she would see her come and go during the week. But when Valerie brought a new puppy home, all the neighborhood kids just rushed over and wanted to see it, and that instantly made Valerie very popular on their block. Valerie and Brenda also bonded when Valerie noticed Brenda's tattoos, and she mentioned that her brother was actually a tattoo artist. After that, they began talking more and more, and every morning they would have a conversation about whatever was going on in their lives. Valerie would often inquire about Brenda's children. If she didn't see one of her kids for a couple of days, she would say, "Oh, are they okay?" Which Brenda thought was a really sweet gesture. While Valerie was naturally quiet and reserved, she actually wasn't a stranger to love and relationships. She was a very beautiful woman who attracted a lot of attention, especially from men, and she dated on and off, like many people her age. She was always very giving in relationships, and sometimes to a fault. She would often put the needs of her partner before her own, which nearly always led to heartbreak. Valerie's mom, Norma, recalls that she could be too trusting at times, and that she believed there was goodness in everyone. She always wanted to see the best in everyone, but these aren't bad things. However, they are things that could easily make you vulnerable and easy to take advantage of. As Valerie entered her mid-20s, she began to look ahead to the future. She dreamed of things like traveling and exploring new places. She spoke to her friends and her family about wanting to see the world, but her family was worried that she was naive about the dangers that could lie in these unknown places. They, of course, supported anything she felt was right. So, to start off 2019, she decided to take a trip to Alaska, and she really started to spread her wings. But soon tragedy would strike, seemingly out of nowhere, and it would send shockwaves through her extended group of family, friends, and ripple effects extending to her co-workers and her quiet neighborhood. So let's jump to Sunday, January 27th, soon after she returned from her Alaska trip. That day, Valerie, her parents, and her brothers met up for their weekly meal at her parents' house. There was nothing out of the ordinary about that day. Valerie was her normal self. They laughed, played games, and after eating, the kids did all the cleaning to give their parents a break. Valerie had to work the next day on Monday, but she had Tuesday off, so she and her mom made plans to go shopping at Home Depot together. On Monday, January 28, the next day, Valerie went to work as usual, but it was when she came home that something changed. That evening, she texted her mom that she felt nervous. She also texted her best friend, Jeffrey, saying that she felt worried about something she just really couldn't put her finger on. She had a dark feeling looming over her, a sense that something bad was going to happen to her. Of course, Norma was concerned. She wanted to know what this was all about. That's when Valerie called her in a panic. Norma thought it might have something to do with a recent breakup. Just 4 days before this, on January 24th, Valerie had ended a relationship with a guy named Justin Orta, and Norma knew that Valerie had been troubled after the breakup, especially because she was now all alone in her apartment, with Justin no longer being there to keep her company or keep her safe. Norma asked Valerie if her fears had anything to do with Justin, and she said no. She said she just had a lot of panic in her voice. So Norma had asked her to come stay with her, but she said, "No, Mama, I'm okay." However, she wouldn't stop going on and on about how frightened she was to be all alone in her apartment. She said she just could not shake her fear. So Norma pressed her even more. Valerie let her know that there was no one specific she was afraid of, but she was hearing about all these murders of young women, and she couldn't get them out of her head. Then she literally said to her mom, "I feel like somebody's going to murder me." That's very chilling, and of course to her mom, she was so desperate for more information. She was prying and prying, trying to get her daughter to tell her more, but Valerie refused to specify why she felt that way. Maybe she really didn't know why, but Norma kept pressing, asking, "Is there someone at your house?" She said no. She asked again, "Is it your ex-boyfriend Justin?" And she again told her no, it wasn't him. It was just a feeling. Valerie also confided in her mom about having anxiety attacks lately, and that she was becoming scared and paranoid of being alone. Norma knew that Valerie could become anxious here and there, but she was usually a pretty positive person. So, this was very worrying for her mother. For her to be this bent out of shape wasn't normal. Valerie told her she was going to try to go get something to eat and calm down, so she left her apartment to visit a local market just around the corner, where she bought some groceries before returning to her place. Later that night, she did text her mom, "Good night," and she told her she finally ate and that she was feeling better. She also promised she would calm down. Norma was confused about what was going on with her daughter, but she knew she was going to meet up with her the very next day, and they would be able to talk through how she was feeling, and she would get to the bottom of it. At the same time, Valerie had been texting Norma. She had also been texting her best friend Jeff with the same concerns, telling him the same thing, that she thought someone was going to kill her. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it just Valerie worrying about something she'd seen on the news regarding crime in the neighborhood, or had someone made an actual threat against her? Valerie never answered that question, but Jeff tried his best to be there for her. By 11:35 that night, she finally said goodnight to Jeff, texting him, "I'm a knockout now. My eyes can't open anymore. LOL." The first sign that something wasn't right was the next day, on Tuesday, January 29th. Norma was now waiting for Valerie to show up at her house. They were going to go on their shopping trip, but she never dropped by. Norma tried reaching out, calling her, and texting her, but Valerie never answered her calls or responded to any of those texts. Norma thought her daughter was probably just tired. She needed some sleep, especially after how overwhelmed she was the night before. So she just let it go and let her be. But Norma wasn't the only one not getting an answer from Valerie. Family members and friends had reached out and never got a response either, which wasn't like Valerie. Still, the alarm bells were not going off yet, since there were times when Valerie liked being alone. It was the next day, on the morning of Wednesday, January 30th, when Valerie didn't show up for her shift at Barnes & Noble, that her co-workers became concerned, and they started reaching out to her family. Norma knew right away that something was wrong. She said, "This isn't Val. We talk all the time, so it's not like her to just not answer her phone." She knew in her heart that something was wrong. She hadn't been seen for 2 days now, and concerns were growing. It was completely out of character for Valerie to suddenly lose contact with her family, and even more unusual for her to miss a day of work without notice. Valerie was always reliable. She took her job very seriously. So, this kind of behavior was alarming, especially since she just told her mom the day before that she was afraid someone might try to kill her. Norma couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. All calls to her cell phone went directly to voicemail, suggesting her phone was either off, or it had died, or it was broken. Her mom, dad, and her now ex-boyfriend of under a week wasted no time. The three of them went to the New Rochelle Police Department at 2:43 p.m., filed a missing persons report. Norma relayed to the officers that Valerie was so upset on the night before, on Monday, that she could barely speak, and she thought that someone was going to murder her, and now this. It was too eerie considering that she had gone radio silent. They explained that the last time they physically saw her was on Sunday, and then Norma and Jeff had spoken to her on Monday night, both of them talking her through her fears, with her last text to Jeff going out at 11:35. No one had heard from her since. One of the first steps the police took was to search Valerie's Colonial Place apartment in New Rochelle. There weren't any clear signs of a struggle, but forensic analysis did uncover small traces of blood in several spots. A faint stain on Valerie's pillow, 2 tiny spots on the bathroom floor, and another on the toilet. However, these were so minimal, they didn't provide much information. The police also noted that several of Valerie's belongings were missing, including her iPhone, her iPad, her wallet, and some items of clothing and bedding. While this might suggest that Valerie had left voluntarily, her friends and family were adamant that she would not just disappear without giving any notice, given her recent fears that someone was out to harm her. The police started leaning towards the possibility of foul play and that she was possibly kidnapped. Naturally, one of the first people they looked into was her ex-boyfriend, Justin. This recent breakup could have given him a motive. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect and even became very active in the search for Valerie. He handed over his cell phone and his iPad to be analyzed, and her mom and dad gave the police a recent picture of their daughter and information pertinent to being able to put in a missing persons poster. Her family immediately began making copies of the poster and distributing it all around town and on social media. No time was wasted creating a Facebook page to help find Valerie. Her family and friends began posting right away, asking if anyone had seen her. Others were posting hopeful messages. One of her cousins said, "I hope you are okay, I love you." There were also some assumptions and false information posted there as well, as per usual when groups like this are created. One person claimed they were a family member of Valerie's and that she had been last seen on Monday, January 29th, walking to a New Rochelle train station. Now this actually was not true, but it was shared on a bunch of other platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and it only hindered the investigation, but noted the fact that Valerie was a grown woman with the ability to leave on her own. Her parents felt like they weren't going to get the help they really needed from law enforcement. So the family actually hired a private investigator the very next day. This PI thought he had tracked her to a Manhattan ATM around 2 a.m. because he was looking through her transactions, and one of them appeared to come from that location, but he wasn't on the right track. However, this PI continued to look for images of women he thought could be Valerie, and he thought he spotted her at 6 a.m. on Wednesday, January 30th, the day after she was reported missing. Now, to be fair, detectives in New Rochelle that were working on her disappearance showed her mother this photo of the surveillance video of a woman at a Chase Bank branch near Radio City Music Hall, and Norma positively identified the woman on camera as her daughter, Valerie. But it turned out she was mistaken. In these stressful moments, it's really not uncommon for loved ones to make mistaken identifications of images. Most of the time, it's wishful thinking. They want to believe that's their daughter, that's their loved one. But this threw off the search, because now there was a new description sent out to the public stating that Valerie was last seen wearing a green coat, black jeans, and black shoes, and was in Manhattan, New York, when that wasn't even her. But that wasn't known until later, and this is all too common, especially with social media. The false information can spread very quickly with how easily it is to just share something. Most people mean well and are trying to help, but a lot of times, it only makes things worse. Valerie's ex-boyfriend Justin was also posting about her, identifying himself online as her boyfriend, even though they had been broken up before she went missing. I understand that may have been just to make things easy, or maybe not to look suspicious by saying that he was her ex. But either way, he started posting on Twitter the same day they reported her missing, pleading for her return. One post said, "My girlfriend Valerie is now officially reported as missing nationwide by the authorities. Please contact me if there's any kind of information." But when the news outlets reached out to him for comments, he declined interviews. He said that he was too busy cooperating with police to offer any information. He then posted something very cryptic. He said, "What's done in the dark will always find a way to shine." I think that could look a little suspicious, but there wasn't anything to hold him on. The missing persons poster said, "Have you seen Valerie Reyes? 5 feet 3 inches, black hair, brown eyes, half a tattoo on her left arm, and a right forearm tattoo. They had the description of the clothing that was incorrect, but they said she was last seen wearing a green coat, black jeans, and a black pair of shoes. They also let it be known that she suffered from anxiety and depression, which I thought was interesting because I have not seen a poster that explicitly said that on it. This information was also tweeted by the NYPD Midtown North's account. I noticed she also had an eyebrow ring on her right brow and a very distinctive way of lining her eyelids with a cat-eye-shaped black eyeliner. She was sometimes seen wearing glasses. Despite extensive efforts by the police throughout New Rel and New York City, they initially had no luck finding any leads. That is, until the morning of February 5th, 8 days after Valerie went missing, when a 911 call came in at 8:23 a.m. A highway worker who was routinely sweeping the streets in that area was calling to report a suspicious red suitcase that they noticed about 15 feet off the side of the road in a wooded area along Glenville Road, just north of Stillman Lane, in the quiet residential town of Greenwich, Connecticut. This was in a whole other state, but the area bordered Westchester County in New York, and it was only a 20-minute drive from Valerie's new Michelle apartment. The road worker explained that he was in an area he frequented to maintain the roadways, and he immediately noticed the bright-colored suitcase that hadn't been there before. Anytime there's a suitcase somewhere, I think it's natural to wonder what's inside and why it's there. So he stopped and walked down the embankment to investigate further. However, when he got to it, he was a little apprehensive about opening it alone. So he called his boss, James Clifford, the foreman of the Public Works Department, and told him to come out to assist him. When James got there, they began to inspect the suitcase. They unzipped it, only to be met with a very foul smell. Once they peered inside, they were immediately confronted with a gruesome discovery. It appeared to be the body of a deceased woman. Now, I do want to point out that normally, during the warmer months, this area is dense with greenery and brush, but when this was happening, it was in the middle of winter. The trees were bare, the ground was wet with ice and melted snow, and you could see right down to this area where the suitcase was found. It was also a very bright suitcase, against the contrast of the winter's brown and black ground and barren tree branches, making the suitcase very hard to miss. Officers from the Greenwich, Connecticut Police Department were sent out to the scene. This area is home to just under 2,200 people and is considered a pretty small town. Things like this were not expected to happen here, so they quickly blocked off a portion of Glenville Road with police vehicles. No one could use this road unless they had to enter due to living in the area. While the scene was being processed for evidence, death investigators made their way to the suitcase and completely unzipped it, throwing open the top portion and exposing what was inside. That's when it became apparent that the victim was a female, estimated to be between 18 to 30 years old. They couldn't be sure, but they knew that this wasn't a child. She was in the early stages of decomposition, with mottling around her hands and feet. The victim's body was clearly forced into a position that allowed her to be stuffed in the suitcase. Her face had been wrapped with several layers of packing tape. She had shoulder-length black hair, was barefoot, and was wearing an unbuttoned shirt and denim jeans. She was bound at the ankles, the knees, and her hands were bound behind her back with what appeared to be white twine and more packing tape. Most of the tape had been placed over her mouth and chin area, and she had been beaten. There were obvious signs of head trauma, including bruising around the face and a large hematoma on her forehead. It wasn't clear where she had been killed, but it did seem as though this wasn't the location she died. They couldn't tell how her death occurred. They had to wait for the medical examiner to conduct an autopsy. The crime scene technicians combed the entire area for any pieces of evidence they could find, and by noon the body had been transferred to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Then the Greenwich Police Captain Robert Berry from the Detective Division held a press conference right in front of the location where the body had been found. He did this right in the middle of the closed-off road, as reporters from the area came to ask questions. Now I will summarize what he said and want to point out some very important parts to focus on. Hey everyone, again my name is Captain Robert Berry, from the Greenwich Police Department, Detective Division. Again, we had a homicide investigation that we're continuing from this morning. This remains an active homicide investigation. We're just about now finishing up processing the scene. Our last detectives and forensic detectives are finishing up as we speak. I do want to confirm the information that was out there a little bit this morning, but the victim was found bound at the hands and at the feet, and the victim was found in a suitcase. The victim has now since been removed from the scene. We have received numerous public tips, which is very appreciated. We are following up on each and every one of them. We do want to encourage the public to continue to call in those tips. Police do have a tip line, that's area code 203-63333. Again, that's 203-63333, and that is an anonymous tip line. We have received some leads on some, I would say, possible identifications of the victim, but at this point nothing is confirmed, so I have no information to release actually identifying the victim. We are following up on some leads. Our focus right now is obtaining the identification of the victim so that a proper notification can be done to the next of kin. It's always sensitive to us that every time we have a tragedy such as this, there's a family connected to it. We always try to keep that at the forefront of our minds, and our heartfelt thoughts and prayers go out to that family wherever they may be. As you heard, Captain Barry confirmed that the victim had been found inside of a suitcase. She was bound by her hands and feet, and I'm adding what was left out. She was also bound at the knees, or as they would say, she was hogtied. The captain didn't provide all of the details, but he did mention that they had some leads as to her identity, but they wanted to be able to notify the next of kin before just announcing that publicly, out of respect. He reminded everyone that every victim has a family connected to them, and I think that's really important. It does get forgotten sometimes. The captain answers the reporter. The captain explained that due to the temperature being cold, as well as the fact that the suitcase was in a low-lying area, it was even colder than the roadway. So they were dealing with a bit of complexity in those terms, and he told them that they would have to wait for the autopsy. Finally, one more important question was when the reporter asked how big the suitcase was. That's a fair question, considering there was a body found inside of it. The captain said he didn't have the exact dimensions, but for reference, it wasn't small enough to fit in an overhead bin on an airplane, so it was more of full-size luggage. Keep that in mind, because there will be more information about that later. Okay, so that wraps up what we can learn from the first few hours after the body was discovered. Now there was some drone footage and other footage of this area, so I'm going to be playing that for you. The area of this exact location was out of sight from nearby residences. There was a small depression on the east side of Glenville Road, near Stillman Lane, and it would appear that that would be a really convenient place for someone to park, which is probably why the person who did this chose this particular area of the road. Maybe they had actually been to this area before, maybe in the warmer months, and they remembered it being woodsy and dense with brush. But it was nothing like that this time of year. By the time they got there, they probably wanted to get as far away from the body as possible, so they still left her there, because clearly this wasn't really a great area to hide anything. Now all this information only left detectives with more questions. The next day the medical examiner conducted the autopsy and was able to confirm the manner of death was homicide. But interestingly, and I think we would know that by the way, I'm just pointing that out, they have to put it on the report. It's like she didn't tie herself up and put herself in the suitcase. But interestingly, even though she had head trauma to her face, the back of her head, and the front of her head, the official cause of death was homicidal asphyxia, which we actually do not hear very often. This is not the strangulation type of asphyxia. This is something that I actually have not covered before, but coincidentally, it has been in the news recently in the Sarah Boone case. She allegedly zipped up her boyfriend in a suitcase and left him there to die, and he was confined to a very small space over time and could not breathe. Asphyxia itself, as most of you know, occurs when the body doesn't receive enough oxygen. But forensically speaking, there are actually three types: strangulation, chemical asphyxiation, and suffocation. This one falls into the last category, suffocation due to homicidal intent to cause death. Someone placed her inside the suitcase when she was still alive, bound and gagged without the ability to breathe. Over time, she slowly suffocated to death. There was an increased likelihood, due to the head trauma, that the victim may have been unconscious before being placed inside the suitcase. We won't ever know if she regained enough consciousness to be aware of what was going on and that she was dying in a very terrible way. It's heartbreaking, and it does show the extreme sense of cruelty that suitcase became her coffin. As far as her identity was concerned, it was known at the time that there was a missing woman in New York who matched the description of this victim. So Valerie's parents were notified on Wednesday evening, February 6th, that a body had been found, at which point her father and her older brother went down to the morgue, and they sadly made a positive identification of the body. It was 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. As you can probably imagine, this was devastating news, especially after Valerie had confided in her mother that she thought someone was going to murder her. It seemed like quite the premonition, unless someone had been threatening her life. That's what detectives wanted to find out next. Was there anyone close to Valerie who may have had issues with her who would want to harm her? The medical examiner did notice what appeared to be some skin underneath Valerie's fingernails, so clippings were taken to be analyzed. They also took swabs of her private areas and her chest to be tested for the presence of male DNA, but this could take weeks, if not months, to get results back. As word spread of the positive identification, the TIC community of New Rochelle was gripped by grief. Friends, family, and neighbors that had known Valerie as gentle, kind, and an artistic soul made her death even more tragic. Social media quickly filled with heartfelt tributes, photos, and memories shared by those who loved her. They remembered her bright smile, her love for books, and her genuine kindness that touched everyone that she met. Her father wrote on Facebook that a vigil would be held the next evening, on Thursday, February 7th at 5 p.m. at Glen Island Park in New Rochelle. He said, "At this unimaginably difficult time, we're asking for love, support, and respect for our family, for the loss of my beautiful daughter, Valerie Reyes, who is now resting in heaven." On Thursday, Norma went public to discuss her daughter and the fears that she shared with her. It seemed like Valerie truly had a genuinely bad feeling that something was going to happen to her, a feeling she could not shake. So was this more of a premonition than anything else? Some of you may not believe that can even happen. Some call it being psychic, others believe it's God. But gut feelings can be a real thing. Even though Norma was still wondering if anyone had threatened her daughter or did anything to make her feel uneasy, there wasn't any proof of that yet. So now, it just seemed like a very weird coincidence. Or maybe she was just very in tune to the vibes around her and was really able to pinpoint that something bad was going to happen. But there's more. They might think that she's just a runaway, that she's just, going into bad things or whatever. Norma wanted the public to know that Valerie wasn't a runaway. She wasn't into drugs, partying, or even going out late and getting into trouble. That was not her at all. She didn't like going to clubs. So, all of this just left Norma with more questions. Now that same night, Valerie's family held a vigil in Glen Island Park in New Rochelle. It was a cold, damp night, but that did not stop people from showing up and showing their support. A few hundred people, including dozens of Valerie's friends and close family members, huddled tightly together. Many of them were holding white candles, singing and praying in Spanish. A lot of people were crying. The gathering took place beneath the park's old German-style castle. There were women holding rosary beads beside circles of candles adorned with images of Mary or Jesus. Norma gave a very moving speech directed at the unknown person who had treated her daughter so cruelly. She said, "My daughter did not deserve whatever you did to her. My daughter was pure. My daughter was a good soul. You will be caught, sooner or later. You will get caught. I know it, I know it." She added that Valerie was amazing, and she wasn't just saying that because she was her mother. She said Valerie was a beautiful soul, a beautiful daughter, a beautiful sister, and amazing in so many ways. Then she told Valerie that she loved her. Valerie's best friend, Jeff, pulled out a keychain in the shape of a sandal from his pocket. It had the name Valerie inscribed on it. He told the media that he had bought it for her while he was on vacation in Mexico, but he never got the chance to give it to her. So now he planned on keeping it on his keys to remember her. As the vigil came to a close, they heard people shouting, "A la niña." The girl, spreading through the crowd, meaning the girl. Another man cried out, "Justice for Valerie." Within just a few days, a GoFundMe page was set up by a friend to help the family pay for funeral expenses, and it raised nearly $3,000 in just 3 hours. But soon, the case would take an unexpected turn. Remember those road workers who went out there and stumbled upon her body? Well, that foreman, James Clifford, when he had been called out there by his employee, became the subject of an investigation because this man took photos of the crime scene on his phone, including an image of Valerie, still bound with a visible head wound. It's pretty rude, disrespectful, and disgusting, in my opinion, and a lot of people shared the same sentiment, because then he took it upon himself to share these photos with other people. Now, sharing these photos was a clear violation of privacy, not only for Valerie, but also for the integrity of the entire investigation. The last thing her grieving family needed was to see these gruesome images of Valerie circulating among Clifford's acquaintances. Unfortunately, one of the people Clifford showed the photo to was a business owner from Connecticut, and it's so sad for me to think about this because it's all money-based. He chose to share them with a media outlet, and when he did, he had to reveal where he got them from. That is how James Clifford was investigated. He didn't face any criminal charges, which I was pretty surprised about. Instead, he received a very minor disciplinary action, including a brief suspension. He was placed on paid administrative leave for like 5 days, and he was demoted as foreman for 6 months. And then he lost 5 vacation days and had to do a mandatory sensitivity training. But he claimed it was just an error in judgment. His attorney, Lindy Oro, who was representing him, said that taking that photo was not with any ill intent. She said it was actually the actions of a traumatized person who was stunned by what they encountered. She said he was actually devastated by what he found, and it was an obvious error in judgment to take a picture of it, but she argued that he certainly didn't have any ill will or bad intention. But I have to say, I do understand being shocked about something happening, but I also think you have time to cool down. Think about what you're doing, and yet you're still sharing these photos with other people. So, I don't really buy that. The public was outraged, and Greenwich First Selectman Peter Tess had to make a public apology on behalf of the county. He said Valerie was a daughter, a sister, and a cousin of a family who's suffering a tremendous loss at this time. The thoughtless and insensitive behavior by this employee was inexcusable. He extended his heartfelt condolences to her family. Now, there were many reactions throughout the community once Valerie's body had been found. Lucy Nolan, the Director of Policy and Public Relations at the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, made a very bold statement to the news stations, explaining that the nature and way in which her body was found displayed an extreme example of the objectification of women. She said, "It's disgusting. As women, we've always been taught, and some men believe, that our bodies are for their gratification. Women are taught our whole lives that we have to look over our shoulders, have to be careful." Now, even though at this point in the investigation there was no evidence to suggest that this was domestic in nature, the article included this statement, correlating the way Valerie was found to the assumption that it was either a partner or a man who had forced himself on her and then discarded her afterward. Since 2000, there have been about 14 deaths related to domestic altercations per year in Connecticut. But remember Valerie's neighbor, Brenda? Well, she had noticed that Valerie wasn't around for a couple of mornings, but she just figured that she went on vacation again until she saw a Facebook post. It was on February 1st, and it had the missing persons poster posted. And when she saw that, she just started crying. Still, she was holding out hope that Valerie would be found safe. But then, when she learned of the discovery of the body, she could not believe it. She said, "It's disgusting, especially since the person who did this to her is still out there." Then, she commented about the road worker who took those pictures of her body, saying, "This is not a joke. It's someone's life." She explained how her children are horrified by the news, It's the first time something like that had happened so close to home. She said she feels like her children are now prisoners because she doesn't know where the murder took place. She doesn't even feel safe letting the kids out in their own front yard. Clearly, Valerie was so well liked and would be missed by so many people. The community wanted answers. So back to the investigation. Remember the private investigator initially hired by Valerie's family? Well, he had done some preliminary research into her bank statements, specifically related to her most recent transactions. New Rochelle and Greenwich detectives took over that part of the investigation, and her bank card became their main focus going forward. Since the last time she spoke to anyone was the night of Monday, January 28th, the investigators began looking at any transactions after that time. It turned out her debit card had been used at 5 Amman, January 29th, at a Chase Bank ATM close to her apartment in New Rochelle. It was only a 5-minute drive away, and $1,000 was withdrawn. The investigators pulled footage from a pole camera located in the bank area and did not see Valerie. Instead, they watched as a black Honda CR-V pulled up, parked across the street in a neighboring parking lot, and a person, appearing to be a man dressed in dark-colored clothing, exited the vehicle, crossed the street, and entered the bank vestibule outside, where the ATM was located. He looked like he was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt over his head, dark pants, and a pair of black sneakers with white soles. After a couple of minutes, he exited the ATM area, got back into the Honda, and drove westbound. This was their big break, their first significant lead in the case. Clearly, this man was in possession of Valerie's bank card. They began searching other cameras in the area for any additional sightings of the same black Honda CR-V. They also searched license plate readers and found a black CR-V license plate that was captured 2 minutes away, located at the intersection of North Avenue and Lincoln Avenue in New Rochelle. They ran this license plate number, which matched a 2017 black Honda CR-V registered to a company out of Flushing, Queens, New York, about a 20-minute drive away from Valerie's apartment. As they continued searching through bank records, they saw that another $1,000 withdrawal occurred on January 30th, the same day that Valerie had been reported missing. This time, the transaction was at an ATM in Midtown Manhattan. The following day, January 31st, a third withdrawal was made in Manhattan, followed by 2 more on February 1st and February 2nd. In total, $5,350 was taken out of Val's account from the time she disappeared until days before her body was found. On February 9th, detectives reached out to the company that had registered the car. It was a car-sharing company that lent vehicles to the public through an app on their phone. Once a user signed up and provided proof of a valid driver's license, they could pick up a car from the company's parking lots throughout the city without speaking to anyone. These cars were available 24/7. Let me circle back to the car because I want to tell you something else before I go into those details. Since there were 2 different states involved in this case, the FBI assisted with the investigation. They had returned to Valerie's apartment, trying to find anything of evidentiary value. Now it seemed clear that a struggle had occurred there. Despite the absence of substantial blood evidence, there were traces in at least 3 locations, 2 in her bedroom and 1 in the bathroom. It appeared that somehow the perpetrator had gained entry into her basement unit and that something had happened in Valerie's bedroom, perhaps on her bed. Afterward, the killer may have cleaned up in the bathroom. They collected various items, including some of Valerie's sketches of different people, hoping to identify and rule out everyone, especially any men she had drawn portraits of. This would suggest that the person had been to her apartment, perhaps sitting as she sketched them, and detectives wanted to rule everyone out. It was like having composite sketches of several different people right there in her apartment. They used Valerie's social media accounts to match most of the portraits to pictures of people on her friends list, but one portrait of a man couldn't be matched to anyone Valerie was following at the time. This piece of evidence, along with the car connection, was uncovered at the same time. The rental car company provided detectives with the name of the individual who had picked up the black Honda CR-V on January 28th and returned it on the 29th, within the time frame when Valerie had disappeared. His name was Javier Enrique da Silva Rojas. His driver's license information, including his address at an apartment building in Flushing, close to the rental car lot, was given to detectives. They pulled CCTV footage from the building and reviewed January 28th, spotting Javier on camera at 10:50 p.m., wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, black pants, and black sneakers with white soles. The same attire seen on bank footage showing someone using Valerie's debit card. Additional footage from the car-sharing lot showed the same man retrieving the black Honda CR-V at 10:55 p.m., just a short walk from his apartment. Later footage from his building showed Javier returning the next morning at 9:43 a.m., wearing a different outfit, a long coat, and carrying a duffel bag. He returned to the building and left minutes later without the duffel bag in hand. When the detectives compared Javier's face to the sketch from Valerie's apartment, it matched. It looked similar. So they pulled up Javier's Instagram account and started going through all of his photos, and it was an exact match to his profile picture. However, he wasn't someone that Valerie was following at the time of her death. There was, however, a photo that appeared to be of Javier and Valerie together in February of 2018, which he posted to his Instagram. But how were they connected? This photo looks like a selfie of both of them. They're in what looks to be a CVS pharmacy location, in one of the aisles, and it looks like they're together, friendly, at least friends. I don't know if anything more comes from this picture, but here is a really good picture of Valerie. Well, here's some background information on Javier D. Silva. Just like Valerie, he was 24 years old at the time, and while there weren't many details about the information on his background, he held dual citizenship in both Portugal, where he was born, and Venezuela, where he was raised in a middle-class family in a suburban area. He grew up in Caracas, which is the Venezuelan capital, and Javier studied journalism in college at a university in Santa Rosa. While growing up, he regularly traveled with his family to the United States, but in 2017, he decided to extend one of those visits. He entered the United States on May 8th of 2017 through a visa waiver program that allows people from certain countries to travel to the U.S. for business or tourism for up to 90 days without obtaining a visa. However, when his allowed time expired on August 5th of 2017, Javier chose not to leave, so he had been living in the country illegally from that time until the present. He told his friends he never wanted to return to his homeland because it was being run by an autocratic socialist dictator, his words at the time. When Javier came to the U.S., Venezuela was facing severe political and economic instability. The country's economy was collapsing, there were shortages of food and essentials, and there were protests happening in the streets all the time. So, Javier wanted to escape this entire situation. When he got to the U.S., he settled in Flushing, New York, where he initially worked some odd jobs, finding work at a cleaning company, and eventually switching to working as a barista at a local coffee shop. He loved traveling, enjoyed nature, and was passionate about photography. When he wasn't working, he traveled widely across the United States, posting photos of his visits to New York City, Washington, D.C., and other places to his Instagram account, which did have several thousand followers. In these photos, Javier has long hair. He's got that cropped beard. He kind of looks like the typical urban hipster, and over the years it appeared from his social media presence that he had several girlfriends, but none of them appeared to be that serious, because they would be switched out for the next one. People that were close to him knew him as kind and thoughtful, and one of his friends, who went to college with him before he dropped out to move to America, said that he even tried to get her cancer treatments out in the U.S. When detectives did run a background check, Javier did not have a criminal record, so they wondered if he had obtained her debit card somehow, but had not been involved in her murder, or if he was the killer they were looking for. Detectives didn't think this was a coincidence. On February 8th, Javier shared a picture on social media showing off a new Apple laptop and computer monitor. They knew that it appeared that he had been the person in possession of Valerie's debit card. So, they wondered how he got those new things, but there had been other suspiciously similar withdrawals from the same account, starting back in September of the year before, in 2018. So, detectives needed to know more. They asked Valerie's family and friends if the name Javier sounded familiar, and sure enough, a friend of hers told detectives that Valerie had met Javier on a dating site and had briefly had a romantic relationship with him, maybe for 3 months, back in 2018. But interestingly, later in September, a few months after the breakup, this friend explained, Javier texted Valerie out of the blue with an apology because he said he mistakenly used her debit card information that he had obtained when they were together to withdraw funds from her account. He felt bad about it and wanted to reimburse her. Valerie then texted a friend and told them to handle the situation because she was not interested in communicating with him. Clearly, this dude sounds a little sneaky. He's a thief, of course, so it's no wonder Valerie seemed to have had enough with him and wanted her friend to correspond and get the reimbursement. She specifically texted this quote, "I don't want to talk to him at all or have anything to do with him." End quote. How do you mistakenly use someone's debit card information that you clearly had to either take a picture of or write down? You had to have a record of it somehow. But one thing detectives know is that the deceptive banking behavior is not something new, but Javier having possession of the actual card was something new and did seem to start the night in question. She wouldn't have willingly given this card to him. Norma let detectives know she didn't know Javier that well, but she wasn't a big fan of him. She explained that when he and Valerie met on a dating site at the end of 2017, by January 2018, they had officially started dating. She only met him once or twice, so most of what she knew about him she heard from her daughter. But she remembered him being very persistent when it came to asking Valerie to become his girlfriend. She also recalled him being a fan of horror movies, and he seemed much more interested in Valerie than she was in him. At first, things were in the honeymoon phase, and the couple even briefly discussed possibly living together in Valerie's apartment. But ultimately, she decided to end the relationship in April of 2018, so just about 3 months after they got together. She began seeing this manipulative side, this controlling side, to him and told him she needed a hiatus. He was very stubborn. He wouldn't take no for an answer. When Valerie initially tried to talk to him before the breakup, when it came to their differences, he was way more interested in them being more serious in a relationship than Valerie was, and it got too much for her. Norma actually referred to it as a tumultuous relationship, especially when he revealed his deceitful nature. When Valerie told him it wasn't going to work out, he guilt-tripped her by lying about his mom having cancer back in Venezuela. Because he was in the country illegally, he couldn't travel home to go see her, so he was trying to make her feel bad for him so that she wouldn't leave him. And we've seen this in other cases. He wanted to continue the relationship, and Valerie was a kind soul. She felt deeply empathetic toward him in a situation, and she couldn't bring herself to just leave him and break it off. But a few weeks later, nothing had improved in the relationship, and Valerie decided to end it for good in the beginning of April. Norma said they found out that his mom was not dying of cancer, and that really raised even more red flags. Valerie realized she needed to distance herself from him, but Norma said that he wouldn't stop contacting Valerie. He tried texting her and calling her after they broke up. He sent her a birthday text on April 4th and songs that were meant to express his feelings, but Valerie had no interest in keeping in contact with him, so she stopped responding and then blocked him on all social media platforms. He was apparently destroyed for a few months following the breakup. After that, they were no longer in regular contact at all. Their last known contact was September 13th of 2018, so about 5 months following the breakup. I briefly mentioned this. Javier texted Valerie, admitting that he accidentally used her debit card info and that he wanted to pay her back. She texted a guy friend that she didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to have anything to do with him, and asked if she could use her friend's account to accept the money that he wanted to send her. Following this exchange, Javier seemed to have finally figured out that Valerie was done and that no tactics were going to make her take him back. But all of this was more than 12 months earlier. So Norma wondered, what did Javier have to do with Valerie's murder? She had moved on since then, with Justin and had been dating him for a while. Javier was old news. That's of course when they explained the debit card withdrawals that were happening since Valerie disappeared, and the man on the camera they were certain was Javier. Was he her killer? They didn't know yet, but after hearing what Norma told them, the detectives could see the classic patterns of a toxic relationship. Javier appeared to be someone desperate for control, and when he didn't get it, he could have become dangerous. From the beginning of their short relationship, Javier displayed what we know as love bombing. He overwhelmed Valerie with intense affection and attention that quickly escalated to a level of seriousness that she found uncomfortable. This tactic creates this false sense of closeness. This period of time can be very intense and make it harder for someone to recognize the underlying red flags. His refusal to accept the end of their relationship and his repeated attempts to stay in contact show his inability to let go and respect her boundaries. All of this added up, the moving too fast, the creating dependency through emotional manipulation, and using guilt to control his partner and make them overlook his flaws and his behavior. Now, these signs can be subtle at first, but they often lead to more obvious forms of control. In Valerie's case, they signaled to her that Javier had the potential to escalate his behavior into more concerning actions when his manipulations stopped working. So Valerie did the right thing in this situation. She left before things got to a point of no return. She was able to get away, but the question was, did Javier truly move on, or had he been stewing all of these months? Especially when he found out that she was dating Justin. Was he planning the ultimate revenge by not letting anyone else ever have her, by taking her life? It was their biggest lead. He had a motive, and he still had her number. He knew where she lived. Could he have possibly convinced her to talk to him that night and let him inside? Investigators had a way to try to find out. They had enough evidence to get a warrant for his arrest on larceny charges for the illegal use of her debit card, and a search warrant for his apartment and the vehicle he rented. They also got his cell phone data, and on February 11th, officers from both the New Rel and Greenwich Police Department actually arrested Javier, and he was detained as they carried out their searches. While that was going on, they brought him in for an interview, but he denied having anything to do with Valerie's murder and acted as though he didn't even know who she was. When confronted with the video evidence of him leaving his residence, renting the Honda, and being spotted on camera withdrawing money from the ATM, Javier said that he found Valerie's debit card on the sidewalk when he was bar shopping in the East Village in Manhattan. But when investigators asked, "Well, how did you get the PIN?" he said, "Oh, I actually found her wallet on the sidewalk, and inside was a piece of paper with the PIN number written on it." I'm sorry, but who really expects that to be the truth? Who would even do that? It was an unbelievable scenario, and it was one after the next. In a search of his apartment, they found not only Valerie's driver's license but her bank card inside Javier's wallet. He also had her Kindle device and one of the pillows from her bed. Soon, they wouldn't need to listen to his lies because they had more evidence. They got his DNA and his GPS data, his phone extraction, in addition to Valerie's service provider's download, because they couldn't find her phone. This would show everything he did on his phone and everywhere he went, and what Valerie's phone was doing at the exact same time. First, they found that text from Valerie to her friend back in September 2018, saying she wanted nothing to do with Javier. From that moment on, there was no direct contact via phone between Javier and Valerie. But on January 24th, just days before she went missing, the same day she broke things off with Justin, Javier sent a very strange text to a woman he had been dating at the time. Now, I could not quite piece together what he was trying to convey in this text. The text was this: "I just found my ex effing in my bed with the guy next door in New Rel on December after years, but I didn't want to tell you." I don't know if it's the language barrier. I know his first language is Spanish, and maybe they translated this. I'm not sure, but he's mentioning an ex in reference to New Rel. And that's where Valerie lived. So detectives just assumed and pieced together that he was referring to Valerie. What he's essentially saying, I think, in this text, is that he somehow witnessed, I'm guessing his ex, which would be Valerie, having intercourse with her next-door neighbor. Since he used to live or be around that apartment, it seemed like he kind of considered it his. I don't know. That's how I interpreted it. I could be wrong. I didn't really understand, like on December after years, because it hadn't been years. They weren't together for years. Detectives assumed he was telling his new love interest that his ex had cheated on him in December and that he caught her. But we know that's not true. They weren't together, and they didn't date for years, so it's a little bit confusing. Most likely, this was just to garner sympathy from this new girl in his life. He had done the same thing with Valerie in the past, making her feel sorry for him. But 4 days later, on the exact night that Valerie told her mom and Jeffrey that she was scared someone was going to murder her, Javier left his apartment at 10:50 p.m., rented the Honda, and then input an address for a church in New Rel into Google Maps. Now we're getting this from his phone extraction, just so you know. Now that church is only 1 mile away from Valerie's apartment. Google location data showed Javier then traveled to New Rel a few minutes after midnight. Now, we're into January 29th. His GPS showed that he was within 200 feet of Valerie's apartment, at which point Javier decided to deliberately turn off the location services on his phone, which means he was not tracking his location anymore. However, the theory that Valerie knew he was there or that somehow they connected and she willingly let him in was debunked because there was no record of any contact made between these two devices prior to or after his arrival to New Rel. She had no idea that he was there. She wasn't expecting him, and he most likely broke into her apartment. Since he'd been there before, he knew an easy way inside. How was unclear, but what was apparent is that a violent struggle ensued in her bedroom at approximately 3 a.m. Now, 3 hours after Javier turned off his location data, his phone stopped pinging off cell towers, indicating that he had placed his phone in airplane mode. Isn't that interesting? Then this is disgusting. He used Valerie's thumbprint to unlock her phone. She was most likely unconscious at this time, and then he accessed her iCloud account. He viewed her Notes app, her photos. He went through her browsing history and the Find My iPhone app, so like all the places she had been, what she had been doing, and he did this until 4:17 a.m. So he is just sitting there going through her stuff for over an hour. At 4:20 a.m. and again at 4:33, Javier used Valerie's thumbprint again on her phone to access her Chase Bank application, and then he checked her bank account balance. At some point, he placed tape over Valerie's mouth, tied her up, and then put her inside a suitcase while she was still alive, and then placed that suitcase in the back of his vehicle. Just a half hour after he accessed her bank account from her phone, he went to the bank and was caught on camera withdrawing that $1,000 and driving westbound. Then, his phone location data was turned back on, and his phone pinged in Harrison, New York, at 6:29 a.m., then Darien, Connecticut, at 6:34 a.m., and then at approximately 7:11 a.m., Javier was once again accessing several different apps on Valerie's phone. By 7:24, his phone pinged on a cell tower in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is where Valerie's body was found. By 8:06, Javier's phone was traveling back the way he came. It pinged in Scarsdale, New York, New Rel at 8:27 a.m., and Queens, where he lived, at 9:11 a.m. Then, once again, he turned off his location services as he got closer to his own apartment, but CCTV footage showed him entering the building at 9:43 a.m., wearing that tan coat and carrying a duffel bag, and then exiting minutes later without it. Over the course of the next few days, he made a number of withdrawals that I briefly mentioned, totaling $5,350. On February 6th, the day after Valerie's body was found, Javier rented the same Honda CR-V in the early morning hours, and his phone GPS showed him going to a car wash in the Bronx. Then, he returned the vehicle to the rental company, clearly attempting to get rid of any evidence that Valerie had been inside that vehicle. The next day, on February 7th, this man callously logged into an online marketplace and traded Valerie's iPad for an Apple monitor and an Apple laptop, which he later told his roommate he found. He is so lucky that he finds wallets. He finds expensive electronics just lying around. Who needs to work when you have such good luck? Especially with the post that he made the next day, on February 8th, posing with his newly acquired technology, knowing that he killed for it. Was it worth it to trade a human life for material possessions? Days later, he's sitting in the interview room, lying through his teeth when they have enough evidence to prove he is responsible. When confronted with even more evidence, Javier still denied ever being in New Rochelle or Connecticut, but now he admitted that he did date Valerie. However, he hadn't seen her since the beginning of 2018. He claimed that everything was good in their relationship and it ended on good terms, even adding that it was so weird that his favorite thing about her was that she smelled good. Yet, he couldn't remember how long they dated. He was like, we didn't have an anniversary, so that meant maybe they didn't date even 6 months, right? But when they showed him text messages and the phone data of him being in New Rochelle and driving to Connecticut, he admitted he rented the Honda on January 28th. But he drank a lot that night, and he blacked out. He didn't remember anything that happened. Finally, the detective showed him a picture of Valerie's deceased and partially decomposed body, and he began to break. In these pictures, she definitely didn't look the same way she had before he had done this to her when he threw her away like trash and left her to die. Now Javier was claiming he was with Valerie on the night of the 28th, and that her death was a complete accident, that it actually happened while the two were having intercourse. Of course, they want him to elaborate because they already knew this wasn't adding up. They knew she wanted nothing to do with him. They hadn't made any plans to meet up. They hadn't had contact in a long time. She wouldn't have let him inside willingly on a night that she had a terrible gut feeling. She was terrified she was going to be murdered. But they let him tell his version of what happened, and when asked how she died, he replied, "She fell. We fell together." When detectives asked if Valerie fell off the bed, he nodded and explained she fell on the floor, cracked her head open while they were getting a little rough while hooking up. He said he tried to help her, but she wasn't responding. At that point in the interview, he began to cry. He was shaking. He was shaking so hard he was having trouble speaking. But he told them that he put his mouth on her mouth. He tried to put air in it, and then when asked if Valerie was bleeding, Javier could only whimper. That's when he said, "I'm a bad person. I did something wrong. I didn't call the police because I thought they would blame me." So instead, you're telling me that instead of just calling 911, he taped her mouth so she couldn't scream or breathe, and then tied her up. According to him, when they asked why he did that, she wouldn't fit inside the suitcase. But he did admit that he drove. He didn't know where he was going, and after he got rid of her body, he went back to his apartment and waited, acting as though he knew that he was eventually going to get caught. Really, the fact that he was in Valerie's apartment for at least 3 hours means he probably attempted to clean up. That's probably why there was only a small amount of blood found. So, it seemed more like he was trying to get away with it. He nodded yes when asked if he knew that cops would find him. He even claimed that the reason he withdrew the cash from Valerie's account was because he wanted to get caught. Of course, the investigators did not believe the story. I mean, there was way too much premeditation for this to have been an accident. But let's say that it was. Let's say he was only there to steal her bank card. See, if the death was an accident, why not just call 911 to help this young woman who was still alive? But he put her inside of a suitcase. She would have most likely survived the head trauma. She died from suffocation. At this point, he was being charged with a federal crime of kidnapping resulting in death, a charge that carried the death penalty. This was because the federal government had jurisdiction. He kidnapped Valerie in one state and then crossed state lines, and she died in another. On February 12th, the same day that Javier was arrested, Valerie's funeral was taking place. It was at St. Gabriel's Church, while the captain was holding a press conference. I will narrate it to you as follows. Ever since Valerie Reyes was found deceased in Greenwich on February 5th, Greenwich police have been working closely with police from New Rochelle, New York. Several crime scenes have been examined, hours of surveillance video have been reviewed, and numerous interviews conducted. Detectives from both agencies have pursued a multitude of leads. There's been an intense focus on the use of Valerie's ATM card, after which we believe she was murdered. This line of investigation, corroborated by others, led us to a suspect last night in Queens, New York. Detectives from New Rochelle, accompanied by detectives from the Greenwich Police Department, located and arrested a suspect in the fraudulent use of Valerie's ATM card. This same suspect was interviewed jointly by Greenwich and New Rochelle detectives and admitted a role in the death of Valerie Reyes. The suspect, who has already been identified by New Rochelle police, is Javier da Silva of Queens, New York. At this point, Mr. D is the only one that's been identified as a suspect, but I want to emphasize that the investigation continues. The investigation is not finished yet. There are a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up. During the interview, he agreed to be interviewed, and I would characterize the essence as cooperative. Again, we just want to emphasize that we hope this obtains some level of justice. Back at the church, mourners came out to pay tribute to a life lost way too soon. In the hallway of the chapel, a video collage of Valerie's life played on repeat, capturing moments from her childhood, her singing, performing in a family play, sitting on the edge of a mountain in Colorado, and dancing with friends. The video also showed her playful side, featuring clips with humorous Snapchat filters and photos showcasing what her mother lovingly called her fashionista hairstyles. Her younger brothers, who are only 5 and 7 years old, were crying as they watched that video. Valerie's best friend, Jeff and Ricky Medina, did their best to comfort the heartbroken boys. Valerie was buried at Greenwood Union Cemetery, and her loved ones, including her mom and her older brother, huddled together, just crying and embracing as her casket was lowered into the ground. Her friend Andrea actually made a public statement about the person Valerie was. She was so alive. She would do a lot of things for the community. She was so sweet, and everyone remembers her as a very kind-hearted young lady. Her grandpa also said a few words as well. "We can't stand the pain, but we have to go on," says Reyes' grandfather. Days after being charged, Javier was already doing interviews with different news agencies, claiming that this was all a very unfortunate accident and that he was so spooked he ran and didn't call the police. He would sob, and he would act like he was so remorseful during these interviews, acting like he wished he would have done more to save Valerie, when it's so beyond clear that this was all on purpose. Let's be real. This man rented a car, turned his GPS off on his phone, and caught Valerie off guard because they had no plans to meet. She wanted nothing to do with him. He had already stolen from her in the past. So whether he went there with the intent to murder her or not, or just solely to steal, an altercation occurred because of it, and it ended in her death. Therefore, it makes no difference. His actions were intentional. When the DNA results came back, it proved that he also forced himself on her. Yep, so the plot thickens. His DNA was found on a vaginal swab, a swab of her chest, and underneath her fingernails. She fought back, indicating that this was not consensual at all. His DNA was also found on the handle of the suitcase. But I also want to mention this. When he was interviewed, he had a bruise under his left eye that was healing. She hit him. We know that she hit him. So she was fighting him. 4 days before this, he sent a text about being upset that his ex was sleeping with somebody else. How would he have known that? Because he was probably stalking her. This case started to appear to be about Javier taking what he wanted, Valerie's body on his terms, and her money. Whether he intended to kill her that night, or a struggle ensued as he tried to force himself and she resisted, she was dead because of him. He was only upset that he got caught. I can tell you that in total, he stole more than $10,000 from her bank account from September 2018 and the days following her death. When her ex-boyfriend, Justin Ort, heard about Javier being arrested, he said that it came as a huge surprise. He said Valerie did not speak of Javier recently, and she never said she was afraid of him either. Justin also mentioned he didn't know Javier was even in New York anymore. He thought he had moved to California. They came here to actually tell us that they have someone in custody, and then they released his name. My heart dropped. It's like emotions of so much anger and hate, but relieved, just thankful. Just thanking my daughter. I would ask her, I would pray to her every single night to guide them, to lead them to any evidence that might lead to his whereabouts. I know a lot of people are going to be relieved knowing that there's this monster, that they caught him already, that they made an arrest on the same day as your daughter's wake. What does that mean to you exactly? It means a lot. It means a lot. You know, it's different when your child dies of natural diseases, but when somebody, a monster, comes and takes your daughter away, or your child away, for what? For what? You know, it's not only hurt, it's hate. So I feel relieved because they have him, but of course we're still obviously devastated. This case took quite a while to reach trial, mostly because it had to be handled in a federal court since the crime spanned 2 states. Additionally, a lot of the delay was due to Javier's defense team. They were repeatedly attempting to negotiate a plea deal. They wanted to remove the death penalty as an option. His public defenders, Mark DeMarco and Jason Schur, worked to reduce Javier's potential sentence by trying to portray him as a good person with no prior criminal history and a positive reputation among those who knew him. Really, they did this by emphasizing that he had been forced to leave college and flee Venezuela with only $600 in cash, seeking a new life in the US. While here, his defense said that he kept a low profile, working hard and being a law-abiding citizen. But I have to say, are we calling it a low profile? Is that what you want to call it? He was actually here illegally, and that's why he was laying low. But anyway, a year later, on the 5th of February, 2020, Javier appeared in court for the very first time. This date was exactly 1 year after Valerie's body had been found on the side of the road, and Javier looked very different from the man who had been taken into custody a year earlier. His hair was neatly cut, his beard was shaved. It gave him more of a clean-cut appearance, which is not uncommon when you're dealing with someone this nasty and evil, because you want to make them look nice, not disheveled or anything. He accepted a plea agreement, which required him to plead guilty to the charges against him in exchange for the removal of the death penalty. In a statement provided to the court, Javier said in Spanish, "After a violent struggle in her apartment while Valerie Reyes was still alive, I bound her feet and hands, put tape over her mouth, and put her in a suitcase." 3 months later, he appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. Now this part of the proceeding is where the defense team can plead for leniency, and friends and family of the victim can share their impact statements. Then it's kind of balanced and weighed by a judge, and they decide what the sentence is going to be. Although his attorneys didn't try to diminish the seriousness of the crime, they attempted to argue that his violent actions were a result of, wait for it, intense stress, compounded by such a long time being separated from his family and his drug habit. He was habitually using marijuana. Last time I checked though, I'm just saying, I don't think marijuana is usually related to violence per se. I usually think it makes people more calm. They also just described him as a broken man that was sincerely regretful for his actions and fully aware of the horrific nature of what he had done. When it was Valerie's mom, Norma's turn to address the court, she spoke to Javier directly, saying that he was selfish, greedy, and a soulless person. She said, "You, Javier, deserve nothing but pain and rejection. A mother can never prepare to face a terrible day like this. I want you to hear the words of a mother who is devastated by taking away my baby girl. My boys are all heartbroken and devastated. My boys struggle to accept she's no longer here. Today, I hope Valerie finds the justice she deserves." Javier was also given the opportunity to provide a statement, and I was surprised he did. He said, "No words can express how repulsed I am by the acts I committed. My acts caused Valerie's death, and I can never forgive myself for doing that. It's my fault that she's not here any longer. Valerie's family deserves to know I'm sorry. I implore before God on my knees that God will bless them and remove some of their pain." The federal court judge, Vincent Bashidi, called it a brutal, callous, cruel crime, and he didn't buy the defense's claims that Javier was a good person who just did one bad thing. I mean, this is a very big bad thing to be just like one bad thing you did. He didn't believe that he was remorseful, and it didn't excuse his actions. Nonetheless, he didn't deserve a lighter sentence. The judge said that what you did to this woman was sickening. Anyone who could do such a thing is not a good person by definition. Anyone who could do such a thing like this is an evil person, and justice required an evil deed to be punished by a lengthy prison sentence. He also highlighted Javier's actions after the murder and how he stole from her bank account. Still, he sold her iPad for money, and he also made sure to mention that Javier's family could visit him in prison if he wanted them to. but Valerie's family would never get to see her again. So ultimately, he sentenced Javier to 30 years in prison, plus 2 years of supervision. He would be 55 years old upon release, which I think is not enough time. But immigration officials said that as soon as that man served his sentence, he would be deported. We've never gotten an answer as to what made Valerie so scared for her life in the days before her death. No threats were found on her phone or within any of her personal belongings, and if there were, they've never been reported. So, did Javier threaten her? Or is there a more mysterious explanation for her fears? Valerie was known as a deeply intuitive person, someone who often trusted her gut feelings. So did she sense that danger was near, maybe picking up on subtle cues that others may have missed? Was this a chilling premonition or a lingering sense of dread from a recent encounter? We'll likely never know the answer. Either way, this is yet another case where a woman's life has been stolen for a man's pleasure, whether that's the physical part or the material possessions that he stood to gain.